Tonight, we're diving into a story of ultimate betrayal, brutal survival, and a revenge so devastating it rewrites the rules of power itself. This is the tale of Lyra Ashen, the Omega they threw away, the wolf they tried to erase, and the force they could never have imagined. She was rejected in front of everyone, humiliated, cast out to die. But what they didn't know was that they'd just unleashed something far more dangerous than any alpha. Stick with me until the end to see how the weakest wolf becomes the one no one can control. And if you're ready for this ride, drop a like, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, and let's get into it. The ceremonial fire crackled in the center of the stone circle, casting wild shadows across the faces of wolves who'd gathered to witness what should have been sacred. The mating ceremony of the Thorn Pack was supposed to be a night of unity, of strength binding to strength under the pale eye of the moon. Instead, it became the night Lyra Ashen learned exactly how little her life was worth. She stood at the edge of the circle, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the frost-covered ground. The thin ceremonial robe they'd given her, gray, threadbare, barely enough to keep out the cold, clung to her frame like a mockery. Everyone else wore crimson or black, colors of power and belonging. She wore the color of ash, the color of nothing. "Look at her," someone whispered loud enough for half the circle to hear. Like a ghost already. Lyra's fingers twitched, but she didn't look up. She'd learned young that eye contact was permission. Permission to hurt you worse. Permission to make you the center of their cruelty. Better to be invisible. Better to fade into the background until they forgot you existed. Except tonight, there was no fading. Tonight, she was the center of everything. At the heart of the circle stood Alpha Kael Thorn. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes like winter steel, and a presence that made grown wolves drop their gaze. His dark hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp angles of his face. Handsome in the way a blade was handsome, all edges and danger. He wore black ceremonial leather, fitted and stark, with the Thorn Pack sigil burned into the chest piece. He looked like power incarnate, like something carved from mountain stone and given breath. And he was supposed to be hers. The thought was so absurd, Lyra almost laughed. Almost. But laughing here, now, in front of everyone? That would be the final confirmation of what they all believed, that she'd lost her mind along with everything else. 3 days ago, Elder Maris had appeared at the kitchens where Lyra spent her days scrubbing pots until her hands cracked and bled. The old woman's face had been unreadable as she'd pulled Lyra aside, away from the other Omegas who'd immediately started whispering. "The moon goddess has spoken," Maris had said, her voice low. "The signs are clear. You are Alpha Kael's destined mate." Lyra had stared at her. Then she'd actually laughed, a short, bitter sound that had made Maris's eyes narrow. "This is a joke," Lyra had said. "It has to be. The goddess does not joke." Then the goddess made a mistake. Maris had grabbed her wrist, hard enough to hurt. "Watch your tongue, girl. Destiny is not something you question. It is something you accept." But Lyra hadn't accepted it. Not then. Not in the 3 days since, as she'd been scrubbed and dressed and prepared like a sacrifice. Not when they'd painted symbols on her skin with ash and oils that made her throat close up. Not when they'd whispered the old prayers over her head while she knelt on cold stone. She didn't accept it now, standing here in front of 500 wolves who looked at her with everything from pity to disgust to barely concealed amusement. Because Lyra knew the truth. Destiny didn't choose girls like her. Girls with cursed bloodlines and dead parents and nothing to their names but old shame. Destiny chose wolves like Kael, strong, pure, untouchable. This ceremony wasn't about destiny. It was about humiliation. It had to be. Some sick game the elders were playing, some lesson they wanted to teach about knowing your place. And the lesson was about to get worse. Elder Maris stepped forward, her white hair gleaming like frost in the firelight. She raised her arms, and the murmuring crowd fell silent. Her voice carried across the frozen ground, sharp and clear. "We gather under the eye of the moon goddess to witness the sacred union, the binding of souls chosen by forces beyond our understanding. Alpha Kael Thorn," she turned to face him, "the signs have revealed your destined mate. The dreams have spoken. The bond has made itself known. Do you accept this union and claim what is yours by divine right?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Lyra forced herself to look up, just once, just to see his face. Kael's eyes swept over her, brief, cold, assessing, and she saw the exact moment he made his decision. There was no hesitation, no doubt, just a flicker of something that might have been contempt, and then nothing. He turned away from her to face Elder Maris directly. No. The word dropped like a stone into still water. Ripples of shock spread through the crowd. Lyra's chest tightened. She'd expected this. Of course she had, but knowing something was coming didn't make it hurt less when it arrived. Elder Maris blinked, clearly caught off guard despite her centuries of experience. Alpha. The signs are clear. The moon goddess herself. There is no bond. Kale cut her off, his tone hard as winter iron. I reject this union. I reject her. The murmurs started then, waves of whispered conversation that built and built until it sounded like the whole pack was buzzing with it. Kael raised his hand and silence fell again. He turned to face the assembled wolves, his voice rising to carry to the furthest edges of the circle. The Ashen bloodline is cursed, weak, tainted by betrayal and cowardice. My father made a mistake allowing them to remain among us after what her grandfather did, and I will not compound that error by binding myself to their poison. Lyra's jaw clenched. Her grandfather. Always her grandfather. The traitor who'd sold pack secrets to rivals, who'd gotten 17 wolves killed in an ambush, who'd died screaming as the pack tore him apart. That was 30 years ago, before Lyra was born. But the pack never forgot, and they never forgave. Kale's eyes finally landed on her, and this time they held nothing but ice. This Omega! He gestured toward her without moving closer, as if proximity itself might contaminate him. Is not fit to stand beside an alpha. She is not fit to stand among us at all. The crowd erupted. Some cheered outright. Others whispered behind their hands, but none objected. Not a single voice rose in her defense. Lyra felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart. That had broken so many times it was more scar tissue than anything else. Something deeper. Something that had been holding her together through sheer stubbornness. Her hands shook. She curled them into fists, nails biting into her palms hard enough to draw blood. The pain helped. It gave her something to focus on besides the roaring in her ears. She carries the stain of a traitor's blood, Kael continued, his voice almost casual now, like he was discussing the weather. She has no strength, no skill, no value to this pack. The moon goddess may test us in strange ways, but I will not fail this test by accepting what should have been cold years ago. Someone in the crowd laughed. Then another. Soon there were dozens of them, laughing like Kael had told the funniest joke they'd ever heard. Lyra wanted to scream. She wanted to shift right there in the circle and tear out every throat she could reach before they brought her down. She wanted to make them hurt the way she was hurting. But she didn't. Because that's exactly what they expected. The violent outburst, the proof that the ashen blood made you unstable, dangerous, wrong. So instead, she stood perfectly still and stared at a point just past Kael's shoulder, her face blank as stone. Elder Maris tried one more time. Alpha Kael, to reject a destined mate is to invite the goddess's wrath. The bond is a lie, Kael said flatly. Or a mistake. Either way, I will not honor it. He turned to two enforcers standing near the edge of the circle. Beta Ronin, Jace. Remove her from Packlands, effective immediately. Beta Ronin stepped forward, a massive wolf with scars crossing his face like a roadmap of violence. Behind him came Jace, younger but no less dangerous, his eyes flat and emotionless. This was it then. Not just rejection, exile. Lyra had known exile was possible. She'd heard the whispers over the years, the suggestions that the Ashens should be driven out entirely, but she'd never quite believed it would happen. Some part of her had thought that being born here, growing up here, bleeding for this pack in 1,000 small ways, that all of it had to count for something. It didn't. Ronan grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. Move! Lyra didn't resist. What would be the point? Fight back and they'd beat her unconscious before dragging her out anyway. At least this way she could walk under her own power. They pulled her through the crowd, faces blurred past on either side, some sneering, some pitying, most just indifferent. A girl around Lyra's age, someone she'd once helped carry firewood when her ankle was twisted, spat at her feet. An older woman who'd sometimes snuck Lyra extra food in the kitchens looked away quickly, shame coloring her cheeks but not enough to make her speak up. That's how it worked in the pack. You kept your head down. You survived. Speaking up for someone like Lyra, that was a good way to end up standing beside her. They dragged her past the fire, past Elder Maris, whose face had gone carefully blank, past Kael, who didn't even glance in her direction. At the edge of the circle, Lyra caught sight of someone else, a young woman in crimson silks, beautiful and perfectly composed. Senna Blackwood, the daughter of the pack's second. She was watching with a small smile on her face, satisfaction gleaming in her dark eyes. Lyra understood then. Senna had been circling Kael for years, making her interest known, positioning herself as the obvious choice for Luna. She'd probably been panicking since the moment the elders announced Lyra as his destined mate. She didn't need to panic. Destiny never stood a chance against politics. Ronan and Jace hauled Lyra past the last of the gathered wolves into the darkness beyond the ceremonial grounds. They moved quickly, efficiently, following the path that led to the edge of pack territory. Lyra's bare feet stumbled over roots and rocks. The thin ceremonial robe caught on branches. By the time they reached the boundary markers, ancient stones carved with warnings, she was bleeding from a dozen small cuts. This was the frontier, the lawless space between pack territories where rogues roamed and civilization ended. Cross this line and you were no longer protected by pack law. You were prey. Ronan shoved her forward hard enough that she fell, catching herself on her hands. Frost bit into her palms. "You got lucky," Ronan said, his voice low enough that Jace probably couldn't hear. "Alpha wanted you dead. Elder Maris convinced the council that exile was punishment enough." Lyra pushed herself up slowly, turned to face them. "Lucky," she repeated, her voice hollow. "Right." Something flickered across Ronan's scarred face. Regret, maybe, or just discomfort. It vanished quickly. "Don't come back, Lyra. If you cross that boundary again, if you so much as set foot on pack lands..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Jace just stared at her with those flat eyes, hand resting on the knife at his belt. Then they turned and walked away, their footsteps fading into the darkness until Lyra was completely alone. She didn't move for a long time. She stood there in the frost and darkness, shivering, listening to the distant sounds of the pack. Laughter, music, celebration. They were celebrating. Of course they were. The cancer had been cut out, the weak link removed, the embarrassment dealt with. Somewhere in that celebration, Kael was probably already moving on. Probably already turning his attention to Senna or some other appropriate choice. By tomorrow, Lyra Ashen would be forgotten. Just another cautionary tale about cursed bloodlines and knowing your place. Lyra looked down at her hands. They were shaking. Not from the cold, though that was getting worse by the minute. From rage. Pure, clean, burning rage. Her whole life, she'd been told she was weak. Worthless. A stain that should have been scrubbed away. She'd tried so hard to prove them wrong. Worked twice as hard as anyone else, kept her head down, never complained, never caused trouble, and it hadn't mattered, not even a little bit, because you couldn't outwork a curse. You couldn't prove your worth to people who'd decided you had none before you were born. The shaking in her hand spread up her arms, into her chest. Heat bloomed behind her ribs, not warmth, but something hotter, angrier, something that made her want to scream until her throat bled. Instead, she threw her head back and laughed. It wasn't a sane sound. It echoed through the frozen forest, harsh and broken and wild, but it felt good. It felt real. "Weak," she whispered to the darkness. "They think I'm weak." The heat in her chest pulsed, spread, settled into something almost comfortable. Lyra pulled the ceremonial robe tighter around herself. It was worse than useless, but it was all she had, and started walking. Not back toward Packlands, deeper into the frontier, into the unknown. If they expected her to die out here, she'd have to disappoint them. She'd gotten good at that. The first night nearly killed her. Lyra had never been in the deep wilderness before. The pack territories were civilized, controlled. Patrols kept the dangerous animals away. Shelters dotted the landscape. There was always somewhere warm to sleep, even if you were at the bottom of the hierarchy. Out here, there was nothing. She found a massive fallen tree and crawled beneath it, into a hollow space between the trunk and the frozen ground. The ceremonial robe was already torn, useless against the brutal cold. Lyra stripped it off and wrapped herself in dead leaves and moss and anything else she could pile on top of herself. It didn't help much. The cold was unlike anything she'd experienced. It crawled into her bones, made her muscles seize up, turned her fingers and toes numb. She curled into the smallest ball possible and shook so hard her teeth rattled. Sleep was impossible. Every sound jerked her back to awareness, branches snapping under the weight of snow, something howling in the distance, the rustle of movement in the underbrush. She was prey now. Fair game. Any predator that found her would have an easy meal. Lyra pressed her hands against her mouth to muffle the sound of her chattering teeth. She couldn't afford to make noise, couldn't afford to draw attention. The night stretched on forever. Hours felt like days. At some point, Lyra started to wonder if maybe freezing to death would be easier, faster, more merciful than whatever else was waiting for her out here. But then she thought about Kael's face, cold and dismissive. Thought about the pack laughing. Thought about Senna's satisfied smile. The rage came back, warming her from the inside out. No, she wasn't going to die in a hole in the ground like a wounded animal. She wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. If Lyra Ashen was going to die, it wouldn't be quiet, it wouldn't be convenient, it wouldn't be what they expected. She gritted her teeth against the cold and forced herself to stay conscious, to keep breathing, to make it to dawn. When the sun finally rose, Lyra crawled out of her shelter like something half dead. Her body was stiff, aching. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her hands were so cold she couldn't feel them. But she was alive. That was something. She forced herself to move, to get the blood flowing again. Every step hurt, every breath burned, but movement meant warmth, and warmth meant survival. Food, water, better shelter. Those were the priorities. In that order. The problem was, Lyra had no idea how to get any of them. She'd never hunted in her life. Never built a fire without matches. Never needed to identify which plants were edible and which would kill you. All of that knowledge belonged to the scouts, the hunters, the wolves who were valued enough to be trained in survival skills. Girls like Lyra learned to scrub floors and keep their mouths shut. She stumbled through the forest, looking for anything familiar. A stream, maybe. Water had to be somewhere. An hour later, she found it. A narrow creek, half frozen, but flowing. Lyra fell to her knees beside it and drank until her stomach cramped. The water was so cold it made her teeth ache, but it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. She splashed some on her face, trying to shock herself fully awake. Her reflection stared back at her from the surface, pale, hollow-eyed, with bruises already forming on her arms where Ronan had grabbed her. Pathetic, Kael's voice echoed in her head. Lyra snarled at her own reflection and turned away. Food was the next problem, and a bigger one. She tried digging for roots, the way she'd seen the cooks do back in the pack. Most of what she found was frozen solid or looked poisonous. Finally, she unearthed something that looked vaguely like a potato, pale and bulbous and dirt-covered. Lyra brushed it off and took a bite. It was bitter, chalky, wrong. But her stomach was eating itself, so she forced down 3 more bites before her body rebelled. An hour later, she was vomiting into the bushes, her stomach trying to turn itself inside out. Cold sweat poured down her face. Her hands shook. Lesson learned. Don't eat random roots. She curled up on the ground, weak and miserable, until the nausea passed. When she could finally stand again, the sun was already starting to sink toward the horizon. Panic clawed at her chest. Another night. She had to survive another night. This time, she found a better shelter. A dense thicket of evergreen branches that created a natural canopy. She crawled inside and lined the ground with pine needles, creating a slightly softer surface. It wasn't much, but it was better than the hollow under the log. That second night was marginally less terrible than the first. Marginally. Lyra didn't sleep so much as drift in and out of consciousness, her body too exhausted to stay fully aware, but too cold and hungry to truly rest. By the 3rd day, she was getting desperate. Hunger was no longer a discomfort. It was a living thing gnawing at her insides, making her lightheaded and shaky. She needed protein, needed fat, needed actual food, not frozen roots and pine needles. She needed to hunt. But how? She had no weapons, no traps, no skills. Lyra sat by the stream, staring at the water, trying to think. Fish? Maybe. But the creek was mostly frozen, and even if she could see fish, how would she catch them? With her bare hands? She was so focused on the problem that she almost didn't notice the rabbit. It appeared at the edge of the clearing 20 feet away, small, brown, nibbling at something in the snow. Its ears twitched, alert but not alarmed. Lyra's heart hammered. Slowly, carefully, she picked up a rock. Heavy, rough. It fit awkwardly in her palm. The rabbit's head lifted. It sensed something. Lyra threw the rock. Her aim was terrible. The rock sailed wide, hit a tree trunk with a loud thunk. The rabbit bolted. No! Lyra scrambled after it, slipping on ice, branches whipping her face. The rabbit was faster, zigzagging through the underbrush. She lost sight of it within seconds. Lyra collapsed against a tree, breathing hard, fighting tears. She'd been so close to actual food, and she'd blown it. The frustration was overwhelming. The helplessness. The absolute certainty that she was going to die out here because she couldn't do the most basic thing, feed herself. That's when the heat started. It began as a warmth in her chest, barely noticeable. Then it spread, into her shoulders, down her arms, settling in her hands like she'd thrust them into a fire. Lyra gasped, looked down. Her hands looked normal, but they didn't feel normal. They felt powerful, strong, like they could crush stone. Her vision sharpened. The blurry forest suddenly came into crystal focus. Every branch, every shadow, every detail so vivid it was almost painful. She could hear things she shouldn't be able to hear. A bird's heartbeat in a tree above her. The rustle of something moving underground. The whisper of wind through fur. Fur. Lyra's head snapped toward the sound. There. Another rabbit, 30 feet away, completely unaware of her presence. She didn't think. Didn't plan. Her body moved on pure instinct. She launched herself forward, impossibly fast, feet barely touching the ground. The rabbit's head came up, but it was already too late. Lyra's hand shot out, and her fingers were wrong, tipped with something sharp and curved, and closed around the rabbit's body. The creature struggled for half a second before going still. Lyra knelt there in the snow, the dead rabbit in her hands, breathing hard. Her heart was pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. What the hell just happened? She looked at her hands again. Normal now. Human. No claws, no fur, just skin and bone and trembling fingers. But she'd felt it. The change. The power. The absolute certainty that she could do things her body shouldn't be able to do. Lyra stared at the rabbit. Food. She'd gotten food. That should be the focus. Not whatever weird thing had just happened with her hands. She carried the rabbit back to her shelter and tried to figure out how to make fire. She'd seen it done dozens of times. Friction, dry tinder, patience. But knowing the theory and doing it were very different things. It took 2 hours. Her hands were raw and bleeding by the time she finally coaxed a spark into actual flame. But when the fire caught, when warmth bloomed in front of her, Lyra could have cried with relief. She had no idea how to properly prepare a rabbit. She did her best, removing the skin, gutting it the way she'd seen hunters do, skewering it on a stick. The result was half burned, half raw, and probably full of hair and grit. It tasted like victory. But days blurred together after that. Maybe a week passed. Maybe 2. Lyra stopped counting. She learned. That was the important part. Every mistake taught her something. Eating that poisonous root taught her what to avoid. Failing to catch that first rabbit taught her patience. Nearly freezing taught her how to build better shelters. And the heat, the strange, impossible heat that sometimes flooded her body, that taught her the most frightening lesson of all. She wasn't normal. She'd never been normal. Whatever was inside her, whatever made her different, it was getting stronger. It happened again when a rogue wolf found her. Lyra had been checking her snares. She'd finally figured out how to build ones that actually worked when she'd smelled him. Rank, feral, dangerous. A rogue male, probably twice her size, with scars crossing his muzzle and madness in his yellow eyes. He'd been stalking her for hours, she realized, waiting for the right moment. That moment came when she was crouched over a snare, her back exposed, her attention divided. She heard the footsteps too late. Spun around just as the rogue burst from the trees, lips pulled back in a snarl, all teeth and fury. There was no time to run, no time to think. The heat exploded through her like lightning. Lyra's vision went white, then red, then impossibly clear. Strength flooded into muscles that shouldn't have had it. Speed that defied physics. Reflexes that belonged to something other than human. The rogue lunged. Lyra moved. She didn't remember the details later, just fragments, the feeling of claws extending from her fingertips, the impact as she met the rogue midair, the sensation of tearing through flesh, the rogue's yelp of surprise and pain. When clarity returned, she was standing over him. The rogue was on his back, a long gash across his ribs, eyes wide with something Lyra had never seen directed at her before. Terror. He scrambled backward, whimpering, and then ran, limping badly, leaving a trail of blood in the snow. Lyra stood there, chest heaving, staring at her hands. Normal again, human again. But she'd felt it. The transformation, the power of something that shouldn't exist. Her legs gave out. She sat down hard in the snow, shaking. What was she? What? The answer came from an unexpected source. Lyra had been surviving for nearly a month when she found the tracks by the stream. Fresh. Deliberate. Human, But not quite. The gait was wrong, the spacing odd. Someone was following her. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But Lyra was tired of running, tired of being prey. She tracked the scent instead, moving silently through the forest, using skills she didn't remember learning. The trail led to a clearing where an old woman sat by a small fire, calm as anything, like she'd been waiting. The woman looked up when Lyra emerged from the trees. She smiled, sharp, knowing. "There you are." Lyra stopped at the edge of the clearing, tense and ready to bolt. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been looking for you for a very long time." The woman's eyes were strange, pale gray, almost colorless, with pupils that seemed to shift in the firelight. "Sit, child. You have questions. I have answers." "I don't trust you." "Smart." The woman gestured to the fire. "But you'll freeze standing there, and I've already proven I could have killed you if that was my intention. So, sit." Lyra hesitated. Then, slowly she moved closer to the fire. The warmth was too tempting to resist. She sat on the opposite side, keeping the flames between them. The woman studied her with those unnerving eyes. "You've felt it, haven't you? The heat, the strength, the hunger." Lyra's stomach dropped. "How do you know about that?" "Because I know what you are." The woman leaned forward. "Tell me, has anyone ever explained your bloodline? Your real bloodline, not the lies the Thorn Pack tells?" "My bloodline is cursed. My grandfather was a traitor. That's all there is to know." The woman laughed, harsh, bitter. "Cursed?" "Yes, that's what they'd call it. Much easier than admitting the truth." "What truth?" "Your great-grandmother was Valdir." The word hit Lyra like a physical blow. She'd heard it once, whispered in the kitchens like a ghost story. A bedtime tale to scare children. "That's impossible. The Valdir are extinct. They're myths. Myths that the pack elders hunted to the last breath. Or so they thought." The woman's smile was grim. "The Valdir were the first wolves. Ancient, powerful, predators that made modern alphas look like puppies playing at dominance. They could tear through stone, track prey across continents, heal from wounds that would kill any other wolf. They were perfect killing machines." Lyra's hands were shaking again. "That doesn't exist. That can't exist." "Can it?" The woman gestured at Lyra. "How fast did you move when that rogue attacked you? How strong were you? How did your claws feel when they extended?" Lyra said nothing, because the woman was right. She had felt claws, had felt power that shouldn't exist. The pack councils feared the Valdir, the woman continued. Feared what they represented, power that couldn't be controlled, couldn't be contained by hierarchy or politics. So they declared them abominations, monsters, and they hunted them down one by one until everyone believed they were gone. But my great-grandmother survived, hid, bred with a normal wolf, diluting the bloodline, hoping it would be enough to keep her children safe. The woman's expression darkened. It wasn't. The Valdir blood doesn't disappear, it waits, dormant sometimes for generations, and then, she snapped her fingers, it wakes. Lyra felt sick. That's why they exiled me. Not because of my grandfather, because they knew what I was. What you're becoming, the woman corrected. The blood hasn't fully manifested yet. Right now, you're caught between human and Valdir, weak and devastating. But it's waking, child. Every time you survive, every time you fight, every time you refuse to die, it gets stronger. How do you know all this? The woman pulled back her sleeve. On her forearm was a mark, an intricate pattern of scars that looked almost like runes. Because I'm Valdir, too. One of the last, and I've been searching for others for decades. She looked at Lyra with something that might have been hope. You're the first new blood I've found in 20 years. Lyra's mind raced. This was insane. All of it. Valdir bloodlines, ancient powers, hunts that spanned centuries. It sounded like a story, not reality. But then she thought about the heat, the strength, the claws, the way that rogue had looked at her with terror. If this is true, Lyra said slowly, if I really am Valdir, what does that mean? The woman's smile returned, sharp as a blade. It means the pack made a fatal mistake when they cast you out. They thought they were getting rid of a weakness. Instead, they created their worst nightmare. She stood, brushing snow from her furs. It means you're going to become something they can't control, something they can't kill. And when the blood fully wakes, she met Lyra's eyes. You're going to show them exactly what they threw away. Before Lyra could respond, the woman turned and walked into the forest, disappearing between the trees like smoke. Lyra sat by the dying fire, alone again, the woman's words echoing in her skull. You're going to become something they can't control. She looked down at her hands, flexed her fingers, felt the heat simmering just beneath the surface, patient and hungry. For the first time since the rejection, Lyra smiled. Let them come. She'd be ready. The old woman's words haunted Lyra for days after their encounter. She'd wake in the darkness, tangled in furs she'd scavenged from her kills, with those pale gray eyes staring at her from memory. You're going to become something they can't control. The problem was, Lyra couldn't control it either. The heat came and went without warning now. Sometimes it would surge through her in the middle of skinning a rabbit, making her hands shake and her vision blur red. Other times she'd go days feeling nothing but the normal ache of hunger and cold. There was no pattern to it, no way to predict when the Valdir blood would flare to life, and that terrified her more than anything else. She was sitting by her fire one evening, maybe 6 weeks into her exile, when she heard the footsteps. Multiple sets. Moving through the forest with the kind of deliberate stealth that meant they were hunting something. Hunting her. Lyra's heart kicked into a faster rhythm. She'd known this was coming eventually. The pack wouldn't let her just vanish into the wilderness. Not when there was a chance she might survive, might come back, might become a problem. She kicked snow over her fire, grabbed the crude spear she'd carved from a broken branch, and melted into the shadows. The shelter she'd built over the past weeks, a lean-to reinforced with branches and packed snow, sat empty behind her. Let them find it. Let them think she was just another dead Omega who'd frozen in the night. The hunters moved closer. 3 of them, she counted from their footfalls. All male, all heavy enough to be enforcers rather than scouts. They weren't here to check on her. They were here to finish what exile had started. Fire's still warm, one of them said. His voice carried through the cold air. Garrett, one of Ronan's crew. She's close. Probably watching us right now, another voice added. Marcus, younger but vicious. Lyra had seen him in the training yards, always the first to volunteer when someone needed to be made an example of. Think she'll run? They always run. That was the third voice, and it made Lyra's blood freeze. Jace, the enforcer who'd helped drag her out of Packlands, his flat, emotionless tone was somehow worse than outright cruelty. Spread out. She can't have gone far. Lyra crouched behind a fallen log, barely breathing. The spear in her hands felt pathetic. What was she going to do with a sharpened stick against 3 trained killers? The heat started building in her chest. Not now, she thought desperately. Not when she needed to stay quiet and hidden. But her body didn't care what she needed. The Valdir blood was waking up, responding to the threat, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Her vision sharpened. The darkness peeled away until she could see every detail. The way Garrett moved with a slight limp on his left side. The fresh scar on Marcus's neck. The knife Jace kept spinning between his fingers. She could hear their heartbeats, smell the sweat beneath their winter gear, taste their confidence in the air. They thought this would be easy. Find the weak little Omega, put her down, go home. The heat spread into Lyra's hands. Her fingers tingled, then burned. She looked down and watched in horrified fascination as her nails began to lengthen, curve, sharpen, into something that definitely wasn't human. Garrett was close now, maybe 15 feet away. He paused, sniffing the air. I can smell her, she's... Lyra moved before conscious thought caught up with instinct. She launched over the log, impossibly fast, and slammed into Garrett with enough force to drive him backward into a tree. His head cracked against the trunk with a sickening sound. He slumped, eyes rolling back, blood trickling from his scalp. Marcus shouted something. Lyra spun toward him just as he shifted, bones cracking, reshaping, fur sprouting. He was going full wolf, trying to use his superior strength and speed. He wasn't fast enough. Lyra's claws, because that's what they were, there was no denying it anymore, raked across his side before his transformation completed. He yelped, stumbled, fell hard. Blood steamed in the snow, black in the moonlight. Then Jace was on her. He didn't waste time shifting, just came at her with that knife, silent and efficient. The blade caught Lyra across the ribs, shallow but burning. She gasped, twisted away, brought her makeshift spear up. Jace knocked it aside like it was nothing. Interesting, he said, his voice still flat despite the violence. His eyes tracked her movements with the cold assessment of someone evaluating a problem to be solved. You're faster than you should be. He lunged again. Lyra barely dodged, felt the knife whisper past her throat. Too close. Way too close. Her heart hammered so loud she could hear it in her ears. The heat in her chest exploded outward. For a moment, Lyra felt like she was burning alive from the inside out. Then everything shifted. Her body moved differently. Stronger, faster, like someone had removed invisible weights she'd been carrying her whole life. She could see the trajectory of Jace's attacks before he made them, read the tension in his muscles, predict his movements like she was reading words on a page. She caught his wrist mid-strike. Jace's eyes widened, the first real emotion she'd seen from him. He tried to pull free, muscles straining. Lyra's grip didn't budge. Her fingers dug into his skin hard enough to bruise. Impossible, he breathed. Lyra squeezed. Something in his wrist cracked, a sound like green wood breaking. Jace's face went white, but he didn't make a sound, didn't cry out. The knife fell from his nerveless fingers and disappeared into the snow. She could kill him. The thought came unbidden, along with the certainty that she could do it easily. Snap his neck, tear out his throat, end him before he could report back what he'd seen. Her claws hovered near his jugular. She could feel his pulse against her fingertips, rapid and desperate. Jace stared at her, waiting, not pleading, not begging, just waiting to see what she'd choose. Lyra threw him backward hard enough that he skidded across the frozen ground and slammed into a boulder. "Run!" she said, her voice coming out rougher than normal, almost a growl. "Tell them what you saw. Tell them I'm not dead. Tell them I'm not afraid." Jace scrambled to his feet, cradling his broken wrist against his chest. For a moment, he just looked at her. Really looked. Like he was seeing something he couldn't quite process. Something that didn't fit into any category he knew. Then he ran, crashing through the underbrush with none of his earlier stealth. Marcus was already gone, limping away and leaving a blood trail that would be easy to follow in daylight. Garrett groaned but didn't move, still slumped against the tree. Lyra stood there in the clearing, surrounded by evidence of violence, staring at her hands. The claws were retracting now, sliding back into normal fingers. The heat was fading, but she could still feel it, coiled inside her like a sleeping snake. She'd won 3 trained enforcers, and she'd sent them running. The realization should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like a door closing. She'd crossed a line, shown them what she could do. There was no going back from this, no pretending to be harmless. They'd come for her again, and next time, they'd bring more. Lyra grabbed what she could from her shelter, her furs, her weapons, the dried meat from her last kill, and started moving. Staying in one place was suicide now. She needed distance, needed to disappear deeper into the frontier before the next hunting party arrived. She walked through the night, putting miles between herself and the fight. Her ribs ached where Jace's knife had caught her, but the wound was shallow. It would heal. Everything would heal. That was part of being Valdir, apparently. Fast healing, fast reflexes, fast everything. Fast enough to survive what was coming. For 3 days, Lyra traveled deeper into the frontier, following frozen streams and animal trails into territory she'd never seen before. The wilderness grew wilder here, the trees more twisted, their branches reaching toward the sky like clawed hands, the cold more vicious, cutting through her furs like they were paper. This was the true frontier now. The place even rogues avoided because survival here was nearly impossible. Nearly. She was somewhere in the deep forest following a frozen stream when she caught the scent. Smoke, cooking meat, wood burning, people. Every instinct screamed at her to avoid it. People meant danger. People meant betrayal and pain and all the things she'd left behind when Packlands disappeared behind her. But people also meant information, supplies, maybe even answers about what she was becoming. Lyra approached carefully, staying downwind, using every trick she'd learned to move silently. Her footsteps made no sound in the fresh snow. Her breathing was controlled, quiet. She'd gotten good at being invisible. The camp appeared through the trees, small, temporary, built around a struggling fire that barely held back the darkness. 2 figures sat huddled near the flames, their shapes bundled in mismatched furs and stolen cloth. Not wolves. Or at least, not pack wolves. Their scent was different, wild, unaffiliated, tinged with desperation and old fear. Rogues, then. Outcasts like her. Lyra watched them for a while from the shadows, trying to decide. The smart thing would be to slip away, pretend she'd never seen them. Survival meant staying alone, staying invisible, not getting tangled up with other people's problems. But she'd been alone for so long. Weeks of talking to no one but herself, of hearing nothing but wind and her own heartbeat. and there was something about the smaller figure, the way they hunched against the cold, the tremor in their shoulders, that made Lyra hesitate. She recognized that kind of shivering. It wasn't just cold, it was hunger, exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been running too long with no end in sight. Before she could talk herself out of it, Lyra stepped into the firelight. Both figures jumped up. The larger one, a man, scarred and hard-looking with a face that had seen too much violence, grabbed a club. "Who the hell are you?" Lyra held up her empty hands, palms out. "Just passing through. I don't want trouble." "Everyone wants trouble out here," the man growled. His eyes were sharp, assessing, looking for weapons or signs of pack affiliation. "This is our camp, our fire. Keep moving." The smaller figure moved closer to the flames, and Lyra got a better look. A girl, maybe 16, with tangled red hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks, and eyes too old for her face. Eyes that had seen things no teenager should see. "She's alone, Finn," the girl said quietly. "Look at her." Finn didn't lower the club. "Could be a scout. Could be bait." "For who?" The girl gestured at the empty forest around them, her voice carrying a bitter edge. "We're 3 weeks from the nearest pack territory. No one scouts this deep unless they're already dead or running from something worse than death." Lyra almost smiled at that. "She's right. I'm not a scout. I'm not bait. I'm just—" She hesitated. What was she? Exile? Survivor? Monster in training? Alone. The girl studied her for a long moment, those old eyes taking in every detail. Lyra's ragged clothes, her hollow cheeks, the fresh scab on her ribs from Jace's knife. Then she looked at Finn. "Let her stay. 1 night. If she tries anything, you'll kill her before she gets 2 steps." Finn's jaw worked. He clearly didn't like it, but after a moment he lowered the club. 1 night, by the fire. And keep your hands where I can see them. Lyra moved closer to the warmth, careful not to get too close to either of them. The heat felt incredible after hours of walking through the frozen wilderness. She held her hands out toward the flames, felt sensation slowly returning to her numb fingers. "I'm Era," the girl said, settling back down on a log someone had dragged near the fire. "This is Finn. We don't usually take in strays, but—" She shrugged. "Doesn't seem right, turning someone away to freeze. We're not animals." "Lyra?" She didn't offer more than her name. Names were dangerous. They carried history, connections, old wounds. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Finn kept one hand on his club, watching Lyra like she might attack at any moment. Era poked at something cooking in a dented pot, some kind of stew that smelled better than anything Lyra had eaten in weeks. Finally, Finn spoke. "You're pack-born. I can smell it on you." Lyra tensed. "Was. Not anymore." "Exile?" "Something like that." Era pulled her knees to her chest, resting her chin on them. "Us too. Well, I was born rogue. My mother got kicked out of the River Pack when she was pregnant with me. Never knew my father. Finn got kicked out of the Frost Pack 5 years ago." "For what?" The question came out before Lyra could stop it. She immediately regretted asking. People's exiles were their own business. But Finn answered anyway, his voice flat. "For telling the Alpha his son was a sadistic bastard who got off on hurting Omegas. Turns out Alphas don't like hearing that about their heirs, even when it's true. Especially when it's true." He showed her his hands. Several fingers were crooked, badly healed, twisted at wrong angles. "They broke every bone in my hands so I couldn't fight back. Then they dumped me in the frontier to die." Lyra looked at those ruined hands and felt something twist in her chest. Different pack, same brutality. The same system that had discarded her had discarded him too. "How did you survive?" "Met Era 3 days after my exile. She found me half frozen, delirious. Taught me how to trap, how to forage, how to set bones." He glanced at the girl with something almost like affection. "Saved my life more times than I can count." Era smiled, but it was bitter, sharp. "My mother taught me everything before she died when I was 6. I've been surviving on my own since then. You learn fast or you die faster. That's the only rule out here." They fell silent again. Lyra stared into the flames, processing. These people, they'd been thrown away just like her, discarded by the same system that valued strength over everything else, that punished honesty and protected the powerful. "Why are you out this far?" Era asked quietly. "Most exiles stay closer to the territories. Easier to scavenge, hunt. The frontier gets harder the deeper you go." "I'm being hunted," Lyra admitted. "Pack sent enforcers after me. 3 of them 6 days ago. I had to move deeper."
Finn's eyes sharpened. You kill them?
No, but I hurt them. Sent them running. She looked at her hands, remembering the claws, the heat, the absolute certainty that she could have torn them apart. They'll come back with more. They always do. They always do, Finn muttered, echoing her thoughts. Packs don't like leaving loose ends, especially not loose ends that can fight back. Ira leaned forward, the firelight catching in her red hair. How did you hurt trained enforcers? You're what, 17? 18? And you're... She paused, clearly trying to find a polite way to say it. Small, weak, Omega. Lyra finished for her. Yeah, I shouldn't have stood a chance against one enforcer, let alone 3. But you did. Lyra met her eyes. There was genuine curiosity there, not judgment, not the mocking disbelief she'd gotten used to in Packlands. Just a real question looking for a real answer. It made something in her chest loosen slightly. Something's changing in me, Lyra said slowly. I don't know what, but sometimes I'm faster than I should be. Stronger. My vision gets sharper, my reflexes quicker, like there's something else under my skin trying to get out. Finn and Era exchanged a look. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. You ever heard of Valdir? Finn asked carefully. Lyra's heart skipped. How do you know that name? Stories, mostly. Legends the old rogues tell around fires. Finn poked at the flames with a stick. Supposedly, they were the first wolves. The originals. So powerful that modern packs hunted them down because they couldn't be controlled, couldn't be integrated into the hierarchy. They're not legends, Lyra said quietly. They're real. And apparently I'm one of them. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Era's eyes went wide. Finn's hand tightened on his club. Finally, Era spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. That's impossible. They're extinct. The council's made sure of it. That's what everyone thinks. But there's an old woman out here, somewhere in the frontier. She found me weeks ago, told me the truth about my bloodline. Lyra looked at both of them, trying to gauge their reactions. Fear? Disgust? The pack that exiled me. They didn't do it because I was weak. They did it because they knew what I might become. They tried to kill the problem before it could grow. Finn whistled low, a sound that was part amazement, part dread. If that's true, if you really are Valdir. He shook his head. You're not just being hunted by your old pack. When word gets out, and it will get out, every pack within 100 miles will want you dead. The councils won't allow a Valdir to live. Not after what happened last time. What happened last time? Era pulled her furs tighter. The stories say the Valdir almost overthrew the council system. Almost destroyed the whole hierarchy. That's why they were hunted to extinction. It was self-preservation for the Alphas. I know. Lyra stared at her hands. Normal now. Human. But she could feel the heat simmering just below the surface, waiting. So what am I supposed to do? Keep running until someone kills me? Hide in the frontier until I freeze or starve? Those are your options, Finn said bluntly. Unless you're planning something else. Lyra had been asking herself that question for weeks. What was she going to do? The old her, the kitchen girl who scrubbed pots and kept her head down, would have chosen hiding, survival through invisibility. But that girl had died the night of the rejection. What was left was something harder, angrier, something that refused to just roll over and accept extinction. I'm going to survive, she said finally, and then I'm going to make them regret throwing me away. Era smiled, sharp and fierce, all teeth. I like her, Finn, Finn grunted. Liking her and following her to our deaths are two different things. Who said anything about following? Lyra asked. You did, just now. Finn gestured at her with the stick he'd been using to poke the fire. That speech about making them regret it? That's not a solo mission. That's the beginning of something bigger, something stupid and dangerous and probably fatal. Lyra wanted to argue, but he was right. She hadn't consciously planned it, but somewhere in the back of her mind, the seeds of something had been growing. Not just survival, not just revenge, something else. Era was watching her with those two old eyes. You're thinking about building something, aren't you? A place for people like us. Maybe, Lyra hesitated. Is that insane? Completely, Finn said. Absolutely, Era agreed. Then she smiled. I'm in. Finn's head snapped toward her. What? I said I'm in. Era stood up, brushing snow from her ragged clothes. I've been running my whole life, Finn, hiding, scavenging. Barely surviving. And for what? To die alone in the snow when I'm too old to keep moving? To get picked off by a hunting party, or a winter storm, or just bad luck? She shook her head. If there's a chance, even a small one, to build something different, something better, I'm taking it. Finn looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Then he looked at Lyra. You have a plan? Or are we just charging into certain death with enthusiasm? I have the beginning of a plan, Lyra admitted. There's a canyon system about 3 days north of here. I passed it on my way deeper into the frontier. Steep walls, narrow entrances, a river running through the center, natural defenses. If we could fortify it, build shelters in the cave networks. She paused. It could work. It could be defensible. Could work for what? Finn demanded. Hiding 3 people? Sure. Hiding dozens? Hundreds? You're talking about building a settlement, a target. Then we start with 3, Lyra said, and we find more. Every exile, every rogue, every wolf the packs threw away, we offer them something better than running until they die. Finn stared at her for a long moment. Then he cursed under his breath, ran a hand through his tangled hair. You're both insane. You know that, right? Probably, Era said cheerfully. Definitely, Lyra agreed. Finn looked between them, then up at the frozen sky like asking for patience. Finally, he sighed. Fine. 3 days north. But if this goes sideways, if we get hunted down because of this insane plan, he pointed at Lyra with the stick. I'm blaming you. Fair enough. They broke camp at first light, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who'd spent years on the run. Era dismantled the fire while Finn packed their meager supplies. A dented pot, a few tools, strips of dried meat wrapped in cloth. Everything they owned fit into 2 packs. Lyra watched how they moved together, the rhythm born from years of survival. Era would start a task and Finn would finish it without a word being spoken. They had a system, a partnership. She was the outsider here, the unknown variable, the one who might get them killed. But for the first time since her exile, she didn't feel completely alone. The journey north was brutal. A storm rolled in on the second day, dumping snow until they could barely see 3 feet ahead. The wind howled like a living thing, cutting through their furs and stealing the warmth from their bodies. They huddled together under an overhang, sharing body heat to survive the worst of it. Lyra ended up sandwiched between Finn and Era, all 3 of them shivering despite their combined warmth. Tell me again why this is a good idea, Finn muttered through chattering teeth. Because dying together is better than dying alone, Era offered, not helping. During those long hours of forced stillness, waiting for the storm to pass, Lyra learned more about her companions. Era had taught herself to read by stealing books from packed territories, slipping in during festivals when security was lax. She could identify every constellation in the winter sky. She'd named them all herself since the old names felt wrong. Finn could identify animal tracks in the worst conditions, could tell you what the animal was doing, where it was going, whether it was sick or healthy. His ruined hands made fighting difficult, but he could still build traps, still work a bow if he braced it right. Both of them carried scars that told stories they didn't want to share. Both of them watched Lyra with a mixture of hope and fear, waiting to see if the Valdir blood would turn her into salvation or destruction. The heat came and went during the journey. Sometimes Lyra would feel it building, especially when they encountered danger. A pack of wild dogs on the 3rd day, a collapsing snowdrift that nearly buried Era, a frozen river that tried to crack under their weight. Each time she felt her senses sharpen, her strength increase. Each time it was a little easier to control. Like a muscle she was learning to flex. By the time they reached the canyon on the afternoon of the 4th day, Lyra felt different, more solid, more certain. The constant fear that the Valdir blood would consume her had faded into something else. Curiosity about what she might become. The canyon spread out before them, even more impressive than Lyra remembered. Sheer rock walls rising 100 feet on either side, carved by thousands of years of water and wind. 2 narrow entrances, one to the north, one to the south, that could be defended by a handful of wolves. The river cutting through the center was partially frozen, but still flowing, promising fresh water year-round. And the caves, dozens of them, pockmarking the canyon walls at different heights, like dark eyes watching. This could actually work, Finn admitted, his voice echoing off the stone. He walked to the nearest wall, ran his damaged hands over the rock. Solid, defensible, water source.
Shelter. He turned to face them. We'd need supplies, tools, food stores for winter, medical supplies, weapons. We'll get them, Lyra said. How? We can't exactly walk into pack territory and start shopping. No, but we can raid, scavenge, trade with rogues who have access. Lyra moved deeper into the canyon, her mind already working through logistics. We start small, build slowly, prove this place can work. Era was already exploring the caves, her voice floating down from one of the higher openings. This one's huge. Could fit 20 people easily.
They spent the rest of the daylight hours exploring, mapping out which caves were stable, which had fresh airflow, where they could build fires without the smoke giving away their position. By nightfall, they'd claimed one of the larger caves, big enough for all three of them with room to spare, and started hauling in firewood. Lyra stood at the canyon entrance as the sun set, looking out at the wilderness beyond. Somewhere out there, the Thorn Pack was continuing their hunts. Kale was probably enjoying his new mate, Senna or whoever he'd chosen to replace the Omega he'd rejected. The elders were congratulating themselves on cutting out the cancer before it could spread. They thought she was dead or dying. Thought the problem was solved. They had no idea what was coming. The heat bloomed in Lyra's chest, warm and steady. Not the explosive, uncontrollable surge from before. Something calmer, more focused, more like it was listening to her instead of controlling her. She was changing, growing into whatever the Valdir blood wanted her to become. And instead of fighting it, instead of being afraid, maybe it was time to embrace it. Behind her, she heard Era and Finn laughing about something, their voices bouncing off the canyon walls. The sound of people who'd found a moment of peace in a world designed to destroy them. Lyra smiled. Let the packs hunt. Let them come with their enforcers and their rules and their certainty that weakness deserved extinction. She'd be waiting, and she wouldn't be alone. The first star appeared in the darkening sky. Lyra watched it, feeling the heat settle deeper into her bones, becoming part of her instead of something foreign. This canyon would be more than a hiding place. It would be a fortress, a sanctuary, a place where the discarded could become dangerous. And when she was ready, when the Valdir blood had fully woken, when she'd gathered enough strength, she'd go back. Not as the rejected Omega begging for acceptance, as something the packs had tried to erase and failed to destroy. The thought settled into Lyra's bones like the cold, becoming part of her foundation. She stood at the canyon entrance, watching the last light bleed from the sky, and for the first time since the rejection, she felt something close to certainty. We need to talk about food, Finn's voice cut through her thoughts. Lyra turned. He was crouched by the fire they'd built in the main cave, his damaged hands hovering over the flames. Era sat across from him, sharpening a knife against a whetstone with steady, practiced strokes. We have maybe 4 days of dried meat left, Finn continued, his breath misting in the cold air. After that, we're hunting every day just to keep from starving, and winter's only getting worse. There's deer sign along the river, Lyra said, moving back into the cave. I saw tracks this afternoon, fresh ones. Tracks don't fill stomachs, and 3 people hunting in this weather? Finn shook his head. We'll burn more energy than we gain. We need supplies, real supplies. Flour, salt, preserved food, medicine, tools we can't make from scratch. Ira looked up from her sharpening, her red hair catching the firelight. There's a supply depot 2 days south. The river pack uses it for their winter stores. Lyra settled onto a flat rock near the fire. How heavily guarded? Usually, 4 guards, rotating shifts. This time of year, maybe 2. Era tested the blade against her thumb, drew a thin line of blood, nodded in satisfaction. They don't expect trouble in deep winter. Everyone's too busy surviving to cause problems. Finn looked between them like they'd both lost their minds. You're talking about this like it's not suicide. It's not suicide if we're smart about it, Era said calmly. In and out. Take what we need, nothing more. They won't even notice until spring thaw. They'll notice, Finn argued, his voice rising, and then they'll come looking. You want to paint a target on this place before we've even finished moving in? We're already targets, Lyra pointed out quietly. My old pack knows I'm alive. They'll be spreading word, warning other packs about a rogue Valdir in the frontier. Every day we wait is another day for them to organize, to plan, to decide what to do about the problem. So your solution is to give them more reasons to hunt us? My solution is to stop acting like prey. Lyra met his eyes across the fire. We need those supplies. Winter's going to kill us faster than any hunting party if we're starving and sick. At least this way we choose our death. Finn held her gaze for a long moment, then swore under his breath. You're going to get us all killed. Probably, Lyra admitted, but we'll die with full stomachs. Despite himself, Finn laughed. Short and bitter, but real. That's the worst sales pitch I've ever heard. I'm not selling anything. I'm stating facts. Lyra leaned forward. We go tomorrow. Hit them fast, take what we can carry, disappear before they know what happened. Era was already nodding. I'll scout the approach tonight, make sure nothing's changed since I was last there. They spent the rest of the evening preparing. Ira sketched a rough map of the depot in the dirt, marking guard positions, supply locations, escape routes. Finn tested their weapons, mostly crude spears and knives, nothing that would stand up to real combat but better than bare hands. Lyra practiced controlling the heat, trying to summon it on command instead of waiting for it to surge during crisis. It didn't work. The Valder blood came when it wanted, not when she called, like trying to grab smoke. They left before dawn, moving fast through the frozen landscape. The snow was deep enough to slow them down, but not deep enough to make travel impossible. Era led the way, her small frame somehow finding paths through the worst drifts. Finn brought up the rear, his eyes constantly scanning for threats, animal or human. Lyra walked between them, feeling the weight of what they were about to do. This wasn't scavenging from abandoned camps or hunting animals for survival. This was theft, direct confrontation with pack authority, the kind of thing that escalated situations from ignored to hunted. This was the point of no return. The depot appeared just before nightfall on the second day, a reinforced structure built into the side of a hill, designed to withstand both weather and attack. Smoke rose from a chimney, stark against the darkening sky. Lights flickered in the windows, warm and inviting and deadly. They watched from this tree line as the guards changed shifts. 2 wolves, just like Era had predicted. Both looked cold and miserable, stamping their feet and blowing on their hands, more focused on getting back inside than maintaining vigilance. The main storage is in the back, Era whispered, her breath misting. There's a door that leads directly outside. If we can get it open without alerting them, we can load up and be gone in 10 minutes. If, Finn muttered. That's a big if. Lyra studied the depot, her mind working through scenarios. The front was too exposed, too well lit. The windows too high to reach without making noise. But that back door, if they could time it right, if the guards stayed inside warming themselves, the heat started building in her chest. Not the explosive surge that came during fights, but a slow simmer. Her vision sharpened, picking out details in the darkness that shouldn't have been visible. The rust on the door hinges, the loose board in the wall, the way the snow had drifted against the foundation, creating a natural ramp. I can get us in, she said quietly. How? Finn asked. Trust me. They moved when the last light faded completely from the sky, 3 shadows sliding through the darkness. Lyra led them around the perimeter, using the terrain to stay hidden. The back door was exactly where Era said it would be, heavy wood, reinforced with iron bands. Locked, obviously. No one left winter stores unprotected. Lyra pressed her ear against the wood, listening. Voices inside, muffled but clear enough. The guards were talking about something, laughing, distracted by their own conversation. She gripped the door handle. The heat in her chest spread down her arms, into her hands. Strength flooded her fingers. Not the full Valder transformation, just enough to make a difference. Just enough to matter. The lock resisted. Lyra pulled harder, felt metal straining against metal. The guards inside were still talking, oblivious. Then something inside the mechanism gave with a quiet snap that sounded like thunder in Lyra's ears. The door opened. Inside was exactly what they needed. Shelves stacked with preserved food, barrels of flour and salt lined up like soldiers, crates of medical supplies marked with symbols Lyra couldn't read. Enough to last them months if they were careful. Enough to survive the winter. Start loading, Lyra whispered. Fast and quiet. They worked in frantic silence, filling packs with as much as they could carry. Dried meat wrapped in cloth, grain that poured like sand, herbs bundled and labeled, bandages still white and clean. Finn found a small axe with a good edge and tucked it into his belt. Era grabbed a coil of rope that looked new, barely used, and a whetstone better than the one she had. They were almost done, packs bulging, when Lyra heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Coming closer. Heavy boots on wood floors. Someone's coming, she hissed. Finn and Era froze mid-movement, supplies still in their hands. The footsteps paused. A voice called out, casual and unsuspecting. Marcus? That you making noise back there? No time to run. No time to hide. The door to the hallway started to open, hinges creaking. The heat exploded through Lyra like lightning. Her vision went sharp and clear. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching into something manageable. She moved. The guard stepped through the doorway and Lyra was already there, her hand clamping over his mouth before he could shout. He was bigger than her, heavier, trained. He struggled, tried to break free, reached for the knife at his belt. She was stronger. The Valder blood made her impossibly, incomprehensibly stronger. "Sleep," she growled in his ear, finding the pressure point at his neck the way she'd seen enforcers do in the pack. "Just sleep." He went limp in her arms. Lyra lowered him to the floor carefully, quietly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "We need to go," Finn whispered urgently, already moving toward the door. "Now. Right now." They ran. Out the back door into the darkness, their packs heavy with stolen supplies. Behind them, a shout went up. The second guard had found his unconscious partner. "Stop! Thieves! Sound the alarm!" But they were already gone, swallowed by the forest and the night. They didn't stop running until dawn broke, cold and gray. Miles behind them now, lungs burning, muscles screaming. Finally, they collapsed in a sheltered ravine where the wind couldn't reach. "That was insane," Finn gasped, lying in the snow like a fallen tree, completely insane. Era was laughing, high and breathless and slightly hysterical. "But we did it. We actually did it." Lyra checked her pack, cataloging what they'd taken with shaking hands. Food for weeks, medical supplies they couldn't have made, tools that would last years, everything they needed to survive the winter and then some. But at what cost? "They'll come looking," she said quietly, the reality settling in. Not just for the supplies, for whoever was strong enough to break that lock, to take down a guard without weapons. "Let them come," Era said, still grinning like this was all some grand adventure. "We'll be ready." Finn sat up slowly, his expression serious. "Will we? Because right now we're 3 people in a canyon with no defenses and stolen goods. When they figure out where we are, and they will figure it out, what exactly are we going to do?" "Then we make sure they can't reach us," Lyra said. "We fortify, we prepare, we find more people who need what we're building." "More people?" Finn stared at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. "Where exactly are we going to find more suicidal outcasts willing to join this disaster?" The answer came sooner than any of them expected. They were a day from the canyon, moving through dense forest when they found the bodies. 3 rogues, all dead, scattered across a clearing like broken dolls. Their throats torn out, clean and efficient. Their bodies stripped of anything valuable, furs, weapons, food. Even their boots were gone. Era knelt beside one, checking for signs of life even though it was obviously horribly too late. This was recent, maybe hours ago, blood still liquid. "Pack hunters?" Finn asked, his hand on his new axe. "No." Lyra studied the wounds, the way the bodies had fallen, the tracks in the snow. Pack justice is public, ceremonial. This was personal, vicious. Someone wanted them dead and didn't care about sending a message. A sound made them all freeze, whimpering, small and terrified, coming from the trees to their left. Lyra moved toward it, hand on her knife, every sense alert. Behind a fallen log, half buried in snow, she found a girl. Maybe 14, maybe younger, covered in blood that wasn't all hers, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. "Please," the girl sobbed when she saw Lyra. "Please don't kill me, please." "We're not going to hurt you," Lyra said softly, crouching down to her level. "What happened here?" "Raiders. They came at dawn, killed everyone. My mother, my brother, everyone." The girl's eyes were wide with shock, unfocused. "I hid under the bodies. I'm a coward. I hid and let them die, and I didn't do anything." "You survived," Era corrected, appearing beside Lyra. "That's not cowardice. That's staying alive when everything's trying to kill you." They brought the girl back with them. Her name was Mari. She'd been traveling with her family of rogues, all dead now. She cried herself to sleep that night in their temporary camp, curled up between Era and the fire like a child half her age. Finn pulled Lyra aside while Era kept watch. "We can't take in every stray we find." "Why not?" "Because we can barely feed ourselves. Because every person we add is another mouth, another responsibility, another potential liability." He ran his damaged hand through his hair. "We're not equipped for this." "Or another set of hands," Lyra countered. "Another person who can hunt, gather, defend. We're building something, Finn. That requires people. That requires taking risks." It requires trust. How do we know she won't betray us the first time someone offers her something better?
Lyra looked at Mari's sleeping form, the girl who'd lost everything in a single day, who had nowhere to go and no one to turn to.
We don't, Lyra admitted, but we take the chance anyway, because that's what this place is for, second chances for people the world threw away. Over the next 2 weeks, they found more. A young man named Cyrus, blinded in one eye by his pack as punishment for stealing food for his sick sister. An older woman called Vera, who'd been exiled for speaking against her alpha's decision to execute children born with deformities. And Cade, a former pack warrior who'd refused to kill an Omega who'd broken some minor rule about speaking out of turn. None of them were fighters. None of them were strong or skilled or particularly useful in the way packs measured worth, but they were survivors. And they were willing to work, willing to believe in something better. The canyon transformed. They built shelters in the caves using salvaged wood and stone, reinforced the entrances with walls of stacked rocks and sharpened stakes driven into the ground. They dug storage pits for their supplies, lined them with stones to keep out moisture, created a system for rationing food that was fair even if it left everyone a little hungry. Finn taught them how to set traps for rabbits and foxes. Era taught them which plants were edible, which would make you sick, which would kill you. Lyra taught them how to fight. It wasn't much. Basic self-defense, how to use makeshift weapons, where to strike to disable an opponent quickly. But it was something. It gave them confidence, purpose, the feeling that they weren't completely helpless. You're building an army, Finn observed one evening, watching Lyra drill the newcomers in the canyon's main clearing.
I'm building a community, Lyra corrected, showing Mari how to hold a knife properly. One that can defend itself.
Same thing. Maybe it was. Maybe the line between community and army disappeared when survival was on the line. 2 months after the depot raid, the River Pack sent scouts. They appeared at the northern entrance to the canyon at midday, 5 wolves armed with real weapons, moving with the confidence of people who expected obedience. Lyra spotted them from her position on the canyon wall, and her heart went cold. "We know you're in there," one of them called out, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "We know about the raid, about the theft. Come out peacefully, and we'll make this quick. Resist, and it'll be slow." Lyra looked down at her people. 11 faces looking back at her now, waiting for orders. 11 people who'd trusted her to keep them safe, who'd believed her promises about building something better. "We can run," Era whispered beside her. "Out the south entrance, into the deep frontier. They can't chase all of us." "And then what? Keep running forever? Watch them pick us off one by one?" Lyra shook her head. "No. We make our stand here, now. Against 5 trained warriors, we'll be slaughtered." Maybe. Lyra felt the heat building in her chest, responding to the threat like it had been waiting for this. Or maybe they'll be surprised by what we've become. She stood up, stepped to the edge of the wall where the scouts could see her clearly. "This canyon is under our protection. Leave now, and you won't be harmed." The scouts laughed. Actually laughed, like she'd told the funniest joke they'd ever heard. "You're offering us terms?" the leader called back, grinning. "You're rogues, thieves. You have no authority here. You have no rights." "We have the high ground," Lyra pointed out calmly. "And you have no idea what you're walking into." The leader's expression hardened. "Last chance. Surrender or we come in and drag you out." An arrow whispered past his head, so close it cut his cheek. He stumbled back, hand going to his face, shock replacing arrogance. Era lowered her bow. Next one doesn't miss. The scouts fell back, regrouping behind some rocks. Lyra could see them arguing, pointing at the canyon walls, reassessing their easy victory. Then one of them shifted, full wolf transformation, bones cracking and reshaping, and charged the entrance at full speed. Lyra didn't think. The heat exploded through her, and she jumped. 20 feet down, landing in a crouch that should have shattered her legs, broken her spine. Instead, she rose smoothly, her body moving with impossible grace. The charging wolf skidded to a stop, eyes going wide. Lyra's claws extended, her vision sharpened to predator clarity, the world suddenly vivid and sharp, and when she smiled, she felt fangs pressing against her lips. "Last chance," she said, her voice rougher, deeper, wrong. "Leave." The wolf backed up, whimpering, then turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush like all the demons of hell were chasing it. The other scouts stared at her, frozen. Lyra could smell their fear, sharp and acidic and overwhelming. "What are you?" the leader breathed. "Your worst mistake," Lyra said. "Now go. Tell your pack what you saw.
Tell them the frontier isn't empty anymore. Tell them we're here, and we're not leaving, and we're not afraid. They ran, all of them, scrambling over each other to get away. Lyra stood at the canyon entrance, watching them disappear, feeling the Valdr blood settle back down. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from exhilaration, from power, from the intoxicating knowledge that she could do things she'd never imagined. She'd done it, faced down pack authority, and won. But the victory felt hollow, because she knew what came next. That night, gathered around the fire, the group was celebrating. They'd defended their home, sent the pack running, proved they could stand up to authority, and survive. Only Finn looked worried. "They'll come back," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the laughter. "With more. With warriors. With everything they need to put us down." "Let them come," Cyrus said, flush with false confidence. "We'll fight them off again. We have Lyra." "We got lucky," Finn snapped. "They weren't prepared. They didn't know what Lyra was. Next time they'll bring silver, wolfsbane, everything they need to kill a Valdir, and we'll be slaughtered." Silence fell over the group like a blanket. Mari spoke up, her young voice uncertain. "What if we leave? Find somewhere else before they come back?" "There is nowhere else," Vera said tiredly. "The frontier is shrinking every year. Packs are expanding their territories, pushing deeper. Soon there'll be no wild places left to hide in." Lyra stared into the fire, thinking. Finn was right. They'd won a battle, but the war was just beginning, and they were hopelessly, catastrophically outnumbered, unless they changed the game entirely. "We need allies," she said suddenly. Everyone looked at her. "What allies?" Finn asked. "We're rogues, outcasts. Nobody wants to ally with dead wolves walking." "Other rogues do. Other exiles. Every canyon, every forest, every forgotten corner of the frontier has people like us hiding in it, alone, afraid, waiting to die." Lyra stood up, pacing. "We find them. We bring them here. We build something big enough that the packs can't just erase it." "You're talking about uniting the rogues," Era said slowly. "That's never been done. Rogues don't unite. They scatter, they hide, they die alone. That's the way it's always been. Because they've never had a reason to stand together before." Lyra looked at each of them. "We give them that reason. Safety, community, a place to belong, a chance to be something other than prey." "And how exactly do we find these scattered rogues?" Kate asked. "We can't exactly send out invitations." Lyra smiled. "We send out a message, something impossible to ignore." 3 days later, she stood on the highest point of the canyon wall at dawn, holding a torch. Below, the others watched in silence. "Are you sure about this?" Era called up. Lyra thrust the torch into a massive pile of green wood and pine needles they'd spent days gathering. Smoke, thick, black, visible for miles, began to rise into the pale sky. It was a signal, a beacon, the kind of thing that would draw attention from everyone in the region, including the packs. "No," Lyra called back honestly, "but we're doing it anyway." The smoke rose higher, a pillar reaching toward the sky like a finger pointing at their location, and Lyra stood beside it, waiting to see who would answer. The first to arrive was a group of 6 rogues, half-starved and desperate, drawn by the smoke and the whispers spreading through the frontier. Then a family of 4. Then 2 former pack warriors. Then more. They trickled in over days, then weeks, drawn by rumors of a place where outcasts could find safety. The canyon filled, 20 people, 30, 40. Each one a story of rejection and survival. Each one looking for something to believe in. Lyra gave them that. She trained them, fed them, gave them purpose and hope, and the feeling that they mattered. But with each new arrival, the target on their backs grew larger. And then, on a frozen morning 6 weeks after the smoke signal, a scout brought news that made Lyra's blood run cold. "There's an army coming," he gasped, having run through the night without stopping. Blood on his face from branches, exhaustion making him sway. "Multiple packs, joined forces, maybe 100 wolves. They're calling it a purge. They're coming to wipe us out completely." The canyon fell silent. 100 wolves against their 43, most of whom barely knew how to hold a weapon. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Finn found Lyra on this canyon wall at sunset, staring out at the horizon where the army would come from. "We can still run. Scatter into the deep frontier, make it hard for them to find everyone." "No," Lyra's voice was steady. "We stand. That's suicide." "Maybe,
But if we run, they'll hunt us one by one until we're all dead anyway. If we stand, she turned to face him. If we stand, we at least go down fighting, together, for something that mattered. Finn studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded. Together. They had 3 days to prepare. 3 days to turn 43 untrained rogues into something resembling a fighting force. 3 days to fortify their position and accept that most of them wouldn't survive what was coming. Lyra worked them until they could barely stand, taught them to use the terrain, to fight dirties, to never give up even when dying. She showed them where to strike, how to dodge, when to run, and every night she felt the Valder blood growing stronger, responding to the coming threat like a beast waking from hibernation. The army arrived at dawn on the 4th day. They filled the approaches to the canyon, wolves in perfect formation, warriors who'd trained their whole lives for combat. At their head rode 3 alphas, their authority unmistakable, their power radiating outward. And in the center, mounted on a black horse, was Kyle Thorne. Lyra's stomach dropped. Her old alpha, the one who'd rejected her in front of everyone. He'd come personally to watch her die. Rogues of the frontier, Kael's voice rang out, amplified by the canyon walls. You have violated pack law, stolen from our stores, attacked our scouts, harbored a Valdir abomination. Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick. Resist, and we'll make examples of you. Lyra stepped to the edge of the canyon wall where everyone could see her. The morning sun caught in her dark hair, the wind whipping her ragged cloak around her like wings. We didn't come here to die, she called back, her voice steady. We came here to live. All we wanted was to be left alone. The frontier belongs to the packs, another alpha shouted. You are trespassing, you are criminals, and you will be dealt with accordingly. Kael's eyes found hers across the distance. Even from here, she could see the shock in his expression. Shock that she was alive. Shock that she'd become this. A leader. A threat. Something that required an army to destroy. Last chance, Lyra Ashen, he said, and hearing her full name from his mouth felt like a blade between her ribs. Send out the others and face judgment alone. They don't have to die for your crimes. Lyra felt 43 pairs of eyes on her back. 43 people who'd trusted her, followed her, believed in her promise of something better. She could surrender, save them, face whatever execution the packs had planned, and let the others scatter. Or she could fight. The heat in her chest answered before her mind could. It surged through her like wildfire, stronger than it had ever been. Her vision sharpened until she could see individual faces in the army below. Her muscles coiled with impossible strength. The Valdir blood wasn't just awake anymore. It was fully, completely, devastatingly alive. Lyra threw her head back and howled, a sound that wasn't quite human, wasn't quite wolf, but something ancient and terrible and wrong. It echoed off the canyon walls, multiplying, until it sounded like 100 voices screaming defiance. When she looked back at Kael, her eyes had changed. Golden. Burning. Valdir. Come and take us, she snarled, her voice carrying across the frozen air. If you can. Behind her, her people raised their weapons and howled with her. The battle was about to begin. Kael raised his hand. The army below shifted like a single organism, warriors readying weapons, checking armor, preparing to charge. 100 trained killers against 43 rogues who'd learned to fight in caves and snow. But Lyra wasn't afraid anymore. The Valdir blood sang in her veins, hot and fierce and absolutely certain. She could feel every heartbeat in the canyon behind her, every breath, every tremor of fear and defiance. Her people, her responsibility, the ones who'd believed her when she'd promised something better than dying alone. Archers, she shouted without turning. On my mark. Era and 3 others, the only ones with decent aim, moved into position along the canyon wall. Their bows were crude, their arrows makeshift, but at this range, aimed downward, they didn't need to be perfect. They just needed to hurt. Kael's hand dropped. The army charged. Now! Lyra screamed. Arrows flew. Most missed, clattering harmlessly off armor or burying themselves in frozen ground. But 2 found targets. One warrior went down with an arrow through his thigh, screaming. Another stumbled with a shaft in his shoulder, breaking formation. It wasn't much, but it was something. It made the charge hesitate just for a second, as warriors remembered they were facing people who would fight back. That second was all Lyra needed. She jumped from the canyon wall 40 feet straight down and landed in a crouch that cracked the frozen ground beneath her. The impact should have shattered every bone in her legs, should have killed her instantly. Instead, she rose smoothly, claws already extending, golden eyes blazing. The front line of warriors skidded to a stop, eyes going wide with recognition and terror. "What is she?" someone shouted. Lyra smiled, all fangs in fury. "Your worst mistake." She tore into them. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't clean or noble or anything like the stories told around pack fires. It was brutal and bloody and desperate. She moved faster than they could track, her claws raking through armor like it was paper. A warrior swung at her with a sword. She caught his wrist, twisted until bone cracked with a sound like green wood snapping, took the weapon for herself. The blade felt wrong in her hand. Too balanced, too perfect, made for someone who'd trained with weapons their whole life. She dropped it and used her claws instead. Those felt right. Those felt like hers. Behind her, she heard Finn's voice roaring orders. "Hold the entrances. Don't let them bottleneck you. Use the terrain. Move, move, move." The canyon became chaos. Rogues fought with everything they had. Knives, clubs, rocks, bare hands, teeth. Most were dying within seconds, overwhelmed by superior training and numbers and the simple fact that pack warriors had been bred for this. But some were holding their ground, using the narrow spaces like Lyra had taught them, fighting dirty and desperate and with nothing left to lose. Marie, barely 14, small for her age, stabbed a warrior in the back of the knee with a kitchen knife, then ran before he could retaliate. She was crying, but she didn't stop moving. Cyrus, half blind, fought with a club in each hand, swinging at anything that moved, connecting more often than he missed. Even Vera, old and tired and half crippled with joint pain, was throwing rocks from the canyon wall with surprising accuracy, each one finding eye sockets or exposed throats. They were losing, badly. The snow was turning red with rogue blood, but they were making the packs pay for every inch. Kael had dismounted, was cutting his way through the chaos toward Lyra with single-minded purpose. Their eyes met across the battlefield, across the bodies and the blood and the screaming. "You should have stayed dead," he snarled, shifting mid-stride into his wolf form, massive, black-furred, alpha powerful, everything he'd been bred and trained to become. Lyra shifted too, and felt the Valdir blood explode through her completely. She'd never fully transformed before. Had only felt glimpses, partial changes, hands becoming claws or eyes shifting gold. But now, with death surrounding her and her people depending on her, and 43 lives hanging in the balance, the ancient blood took over completely. She grew. Not just wolf size, but bigger, taller. Her fur came in silver white, glowing almost, like moonlight made solid and given teeth. Her claws extended longer than any normal wolf's, curved and wicked and sharp enough to cut stone. And her eyes, burning gold, radiating power that made nearby warriors stumble back, made horses scream and bolt. She was Valdir, the first wolf, the nightmare the packs had tried to erase from history and memory. Kael hesitated just for a heartbeat, just long enough to feel fear. That was all the opening she needed. They collided with the force of an avalanche, two wolves crashing together hard enough to shake snow from the canyon walls. It was the fight of Lyra's life. Kael was strong, trained since birth, ruthless in the way only pack-bred alphas could be. He fought with the confidence of someone who'd never lost, who'd always been the apex predator in any situation. His jaws snapped at her throat, missing by inches. His claws tore through her fur, drawing blood that steamed in the cold air. He was trying to pin her, to use his weight advantage to end this quickly. But Lyra was faster, stronger. The Valdir blood made her something beyond alpha, beyond pack hierarchy, beyond everything the modern wolves understood about power. She twisted under him, used his momentum against him, came up with her jaws closing around his throat. Not enough to kill. Not yet. Enough to make a point. Kael went still beneath her, his eyes rolling with barely controlled panic. She could feel his pulse against her tongue, rapid and desperate. One bite. That's all it would take. One bite, and the alpha who'd rejected her would be dead. Around them, the battle was slowing as wolves noticed their alpha pinned. Warriors stopped mid-swing, rogues backed away, waiting. Lyra released him, stepped back, shifted to human form, standing over him bloodied and naked and victorious. She didn't care about modesty, didn't care about anything except the moment. "Call them off," she said, her voice raw from screaming, "or I end this right now." Kael shifted back to human, hand going to his torn throat. Blood seeped between his fingers, bright red against his pale skin. He looked at her with something between hatred and disbelief and a kind of horrified respect. "You're a monster," he breathed. "You made me one." Lyra raised her voice so everyone could hear, every warrior, every rogue, every witness to this moment. "I didn't want this. I wanted to be left alone. You came here. You brought an army to slaughter people whose only crime was surviving exile." The fighting had stopped completely. Warriors and rogues alike stood frozen, weapons still raised, watching this confrontation unfold. One of the other alphas, a woman with gray-streaked hair and scars crossing her face, stepped forward carefully. "She has Kael. If we continue, she kills him. That's not a question." "Then we kill her," the third alpha snarled. Marcus, Lyra remembered, alpha of the Stone Pack, known for his brutality. "And every rogue in this canyon. We came here to purge. We purge." "At what cost?" the woman countered. Her name was Celine, alpha of the River Pack. "Look around, Marcus. We've lost 15 warriors already. 15. Against rogues. Against untrained outcasts who barely know which end of a knife to hold. How many more before we win? 20? 30? 50? Is this canyon worth that?" Marcus's jaw worked, muscles twitching. He looked at the bodies. Most were rogues, yes, but enough were pack warriors to make the victory costly. Expensive. The kind of expense that alphas answered for in council. "She's Valdir," he said finally, spitting the word like poison. "We can't let her live. The council was clear about this. Valdir are to be exterminated on sight." "The council isn't here dying," Era shouted from the canyon wall, her voice carrying. "We are." Lyra kept her eyes on Kael, her foot pressed against his chest to keep him down. "You rejected me because you said I was weak, cursed, not fit to stand among wolves." She gestured at the battlefield around them, at the bodies, at the proof of what she'd become. "Does this look weak to you?" Kael said nothing, just glared at her with undisguised hatred. But there was something else in his eyes now, too. Fear. Real, genuine fear of what she could do to him. "I'm offering terms," Lyra continued, addressing all three alphas now. "Leave us alone. Recognize this canyon as neutral territory. We won't raid, we won't attack, we won't cause problems for the packs. But we won't be hunted anymore either." "You're in no position to offer terms," Marcus spat. "Aren't I?" Lyra's claws extended slightly, just enough to press against Kael's throat. He went very still. "I have your ally at my mercy. I have the high ground. I have defenders who've already proven they'll die fighting rather than submit. And I have a Valdir bloodline that your warriors are clearly terrified of." She paused, letting that sink in. "How many more of your warriors are you willing to lose today, Alpha Marcus? How will you explain those losses to your pack, to the council?" Celine was studying her with sharp, calculating eyes. "You're asking us to legitimize rogue settlement. That's never been done in the history of the packs. Then be the first. Show the other packs that mercy isn't weakness, that there's more than one way to handle the exile problem." "Mercy?" Marcus laughed, harsh and bitter. "You don't know what you're asking. If we leave you alive, every exile, every rogue, every discontented wolf will flock here. You'll become a beacon for dissent, a rallying point for every wolf who thinks they're too good for pack law." "Good," Lyra said simply. "Let them come. Let every wolf the packs throw away find safety here. Let them build lives instead of dying alone in the snow like animals." "That's rebellion," Marcus said. "That's survival. There's a difference." Celine was still watching her, head tilted slightly. "If we agree, and I'm not saying we will, what guarantee do we have that you won't use this place to launch attacks? That you won't gather an army and come for revenge? That you won't become exactly the threat we fear?" Lyra met her eyes. "My word, I know that's not worth much to you. I know pack law doesn't recognize rogue promises. But it's all I have to give. Your word," Marcus scoffed. "The word of a Valdir mongrel who should have been culled at birth. The word of someone who just had your ally's throat in her jaws and chose not to kill him," Lyra shot back. "If I wanted war, Alpha Marcus, if I wanted revenge and blood and everything you're afraid of, you'd be digging graves right now instead of standing there talking. Kael would be dead. Half your warriors would be dead. I could have made that choice. I didn't." Silence fell over the battlefield. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of blood and sweat and fear. Somewhere, a wounded warrior moaned. Finally, Celine spoke. "I'll take your terms to the council. No promises, no guarantees. But I'll speak for you. I'll argue that neutrality serves everyone's interests better than extermination. Celine, Marcus growled, you can't be serious. I'm serious about not wasting more warriors on a battle we're not clearly winning. Celine's voice was hard, the voice of someone who'd led through worse. Look at our losses, Marcus. Look at what these rogues have accomplished with nothing but desperation and a leader who refused to die quietly. If we press this now, yes, we'll probably win. We have the numbers. But at what cost? 30 dead? 40? How do we justify that to our packs when we go home? Marcus looked around at the battlefield, at the bodies of his warriors scattered like broken toys, at the rogues still standing defiant on the canyon walls with makeshift weapons and fierce eyes. His expression twisted with fury, with the kind of rage that came from being denied what should have been easy. But he didn't argue further. Celine turned back to Lyra. You have one season, winter into spring. We'll debate your proposal in council, but if any of your people set foot on Packlands, if we hear of any raids, any attacks, any hint that you're becoming the threat Marcus fears, she let the sentence hang, the implication clear. Understood, Lyra said. Release him. Lyra stepped back from Kael. He rose slowly, unsteadily, his hand still pressed to his bleeding throat. Blood dripped between his fingers, staining the snow. He looked at her with eyes full of poison. This isn't over, he said quietly, for her ears alone. It is for today, Lyra replied. The army withdrew. Slowly, reluctantly, with warriors casting suspicious glances over their shoulders like they expected an ambush. They collected their wounded, loaded them onto horses and makeshift stretchers with groans and curses. The dead they left. Both sides did. Too many to carry, too frozen to bury properly. They'd have to come back later, after the ground thawed. Lyra watched them go until they disappeared over the horizon, became dark shapes against the snow, and then nothing. Only then did she allow herself to collapse. Her legs gave out. She hit the ground hard, barely feeling it. The Valder blood was receding, leaving her hollow and shaking. Every injury she'd ignored during the fight came flooding back, deep claw marks across her ribs, a gash on her shoulder, bruises everywhere. Lyra! Finn was there, catching her before she fell completely. Someone get Vera, now! She woke in the main cave with Era hovering over her, pressing a wet cloth to her forehead. Pain was everywhere, a dull throb that made thinking difficult. You've been out for 6 hours, Era said quietly. We thought you might not wake up. The transformation took too much out of you. Lyra tried to sit up. Pain exploded through her body, every muscle screaming, every wound burning like they'd packed them with hot coals. How many did we lose? Era's expression tightened, went carefully blank. 17. More than a third of our people. The number hit like a physical blow, like someone had driven a fist into her chest. 17 people dead because Lyra had chosen to stand and fight. 17 people who'd trusted her to keep them safe, who'd believed her promises about building something better. Names, Lyra said hoarsely. I need their names. Era listed them. Some Lyra had known well. Cyrus, the half-blind man who'd fought with 2 clubs. Others were newer arrivals she'd barely spoken to. All of them dead. All of them her responsibility. It's not your fault, Era said, reading her face. They knew the risks. They chose to fight. You gave them that choice. I led them into it. You gave them a chance. Era squeezed her shoulder. That's more than the Pax ever did. More than anyone ever did. We held, Lyra. Against an army, against impossible odds, we held. And now we have terms. Recognition. A future that's more than just running until we die. Lyra closed her eyes. 17 dead, 26 survivors, and an uncertain truce that could collapse at any moment if she made one wrong move. But they'd survived. Against 100 warriors, they'd survived. Over the following weeks, word spread through the frontier like wildfire. The rogues who'd stood against an army and won. The canyon that had become neutral ground. The Valdir who'd offered mercy instead of slaughter. Every exile, every outcast, every wolf hiding in the wilderness heard the story and wondered if it could be true. More came, slowly at first, then in larger groups. Rogues who'd heard the rumors and wanted to see if Sanctuary was real. Exiles looking for the promised safety. Even a few pack wolves who'd grown tired of the hierarchy, tired of the brutality, tired of watching Omegas beaten for minor infractions. The canyon swelled to 60 people, then 80, then 100. They built in earnest now. Proper shelters carved deeper into the cave systems, reinforced with salvaged wood and stone. Storage facilities for food that wouldn't spoil. a communal eating area where everyone gathered for meals, where no one sat alone unless they wanted to. Training grounds where Lyra taught combat to anyone willing to learn. A council system where decisions were made collectively rather than by alpha decree. It wasn't perfect. There were fights over food distribution, disagreements about who did what work, moments when the old pack mentality surfaced and threatened to tear everything apart. Someone would try to claim dominance, someone else would challenge, and suddenly they were back to the hierarchy they'd fled. But they worked through it, built something new from the ashes of what they'd been. Finn oversaw construction, his damaged hands proving surprisingly good at designing structures that maximized the canyon's natural defenses. He'd sketch plans in the dirt, explain load-bearing principles, teach people how to carve stone without breaking their tools. Era led hunting parties deeper into the frontier and organized trading missions to other rogue groups, bartering preserved food for tools and information. Vera established a medical system, training younger wolves in herbal medicine and basic surgery. And Lyra led. Not as an alpha, she refused that title, refused the hierarchy that had rejected her, but as someone who'd proven she'd die for her people if necessary, who'd stood between them and an army and somehow survived. 3 months after the battle, a messenger arrived from the Pack Council. He was young, nervous, clearly uncomfortable being in a rogue settlement. His eyes darted around like he expected to be attacked at any moment. Lyra met him at the canyon entrance with Finn and Era flanking her, both armed. "I bring word from Alpha Selene," he said, his voice shaking slightly. He held out a sealed letter like it might burn him. "The Council has reached a decision regarding your petition." Lyra's heart hammered. This was it. Recognition or war? Legitimacy or extermination? Everything they'd built hanging on a political decision made by people who'd never set foot in this canyon. She took the letter, broke the seal, read quickly. The formal language was dense, full of legal terms she barely understood, but the core message was clear. "The Council has agreed to recognize this canyon as neutral territory," she said aloud, her voice steady despite the emotions churning in her chest. "Rogues residing here will be considered under our protection rather than subject to Pack justice. In exchange, we agree to the following terms: no raids on Pack territories, no attacks on Pack members, no harboring of criminals wanted for murder or high treason." Relief crashed through the assembled rogues. Someone started crying. Others cheered. "There's more," the messenger said quickly. "Alpha Selene wishes to meet with you, privately, to discuss the future of Rogue Pack relations." The cheering stopped. Finn tensed beside her. "That's a trap." "Maybe," the messenger admitted, looking miserable. But she gave her word under council seal. Breaking it would cost her everything, her status, her position, probably her life. The council doesn't forgive oath-breaking. Lyra studied the letter again. It was exactly as the messenger said. A formal invitation, bound by council law, witnessed and sealed. Breaking it would be political suicide. "Tell her I'll come," Lyra said. "1 week from today. I choose the location." The messenger nodded, clearly relieved to be leaving. He fled back toward Packlands like wolves were chasing him. Finn waited until he was gone before exploding. "You can't seriously be considering this." "I am. They'll kill you the moment you step outside this canyon. Council seal or not, they'll find a way." "Probably not. Selene's political. She's smart. She wants something, and dead I'm useless to her." Lyra folded the letter carefully. "Besides, we need allies, real allies. If the packs are fracturing over rogue policy, if there's dissent in the council, we can use that. Or you can die trying." Lyra smiled grimly. "When has that ever stopped me?" The meeting took place in a clearing exactly halfway between Packlands and the canyon. Neutral ground, witnessed by representatives from both sides. Finn and Era for the rogues. 2 council members for the packs. Selene arrived with minimal escort. Just 2 guards, both keeping their distance. She'd kept her word. Lyra came alone, despite protests. They stood facing each other across the clearing, 2 leaders from opposite worlds, separated by maybe 20 feet and centuries of history. "You took a risk coming here," Selene said. "So did you." "True." Selene studied her with those sharp, calculating eyes. "The council is divided. Half want you dead on principle. Valdir are an abomination. Rogues are a disease. The usual rhetoric. The other half are curious about what you're building. And you? I'm practical. I see a future where rogues and packs can coexist without constant bloodshed, without wasting resources hunting people who just want to be left alone.
But that requires trust on both sides. It requires proof that you're not becoming what Marcus fears. Celine paused. I also see a young woman who could have killed Kale Thorne and chose mercy instead. That speaks to character, to restraint. Those aren't common qualities. What do you want from me, Alpha Celine? Information about the Valder bloodline, about what you're capable of, what limits you have, and in exchange I offer you something valuable, protection, political protection, support and counsel when the Hawks call for your extermination. Lyra considered carefully. It was a deal with teeth on both sides, information for safety, secrets for survival. The Valder blood is unpredictable. I can control it better now than I could 3 months ago, but it still comes and goes based on threat level. When I'm calm, I'm mostly normal. When I'm fighting, when my people are in danger, it takes over completely. I'm faster, stronger, heal quicker than normal wolves. I don't know the full extent because it's still waking up, still evolving. And the others in your canyon? Any other Valder? No, just me. And that old woman I met months ago, but she disappeared. I haven't seen her since. Celine nodded slowly, processing. The Council fears you'll breed, that you'll create an army of Valdir, that in a generation there'll be dozens of wolves with your abilities. I'm not trying to create anything except a place where outcasts can survive without becoming monsters. I believe you, but belief and politics are different animals. They operate on different principles. Celine stepped closer, lowering her voice. I'm going to be honest with you, Lyra. There are forces in the Council who will never accept your existence. Marcus, certainly. Kale's father. Others. They'll push for elimination regardless of what you do or don't do. Your best chance, your only chance, is to become too useful, too valuable, to kill. How do I do that? By being exactly what you're becoming, a stabilizing force for rogues. A place where dissent goes to die quietly instead of festering into violence. Celine's eyes were sharp, intense. The packs have a problem. Exiles cause trouble. They raid, they attack, they spread disease and resentment. If your canyon becomes where those exiles go instead, if you can promise to keep them controlled, contained, peaceful, you want me to be a prison. I want you to be a solution, Celine corrected. One that keeps everyone alive. Your people get safety and community. The packs get security and fewer problems. Everyone wins. Lyra wanted to refuse, wanted to tell Celine exactly where she could shove her political maneuvering, her calculations, her cold pragmatism. But she thought about the 17 dead from the battle, about the 100 people currently living in the canyon who depended on her decisions being smart instead of satisfying, about the uncertain future they all faced. I'll consider it, she said finally, but I make no promises. I won't turn my canyon into a dumping ground for every problem Wolf the Packs don't want to deal with. That's all I ask. Consideration. Celine extended her hand. 1 season, Lyra Ashen. Prove your canyon can work without becoming a threat. Prove you can lead without becoming a tyrant. Do that, and I'll fight for your permanent recognition in council. Lyra took her hand. The grip was firm, formal, sealing an agreement that could save or damn them all. 1 season, Lyra agreed. She returned to the canyon as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Her people were waiting at the entrance. Finn, Era, Cade, Vera, Mari, all of them watching with anxious eyes. Well, Finn demanded, did she try to kill you? Lyra smiled. No, she tried to recruit me. We have a chance, a real chance to make this permanent. We already proved ourselves in battle. We proved we can fight. Now we have to prove we can build, that we're worth more alive than dead. Lyra looked at her people, battered, scarred, but alive. Still alive against all odds. We have 1 season to show the packs that outcasts are worth more than execution, that mercy is stronger than slaughter. And if we fail, Mari asked quietly, then we fight again. But this time, we'll have tried everything else first. The season that followed was the hardest work any of them had ever done. They established formal trade routes with other rogue groups, exchanged preserved food for tools and information, created a justice system that didn't rely on alpha authority, where disputes were settled by council vote instead of dominance challenges. Built gardens in the few patches of soil that weren't frozen solid, planning for a future where they could grow their own food, sent parties to help other rogue settlements, spreading goodwill and building alliances that might matter if war came again. Word continued to spread through the frontier, the canyon that had stood against an army,
The place where rogues became people instead of problems. The Valdir who'd chosen mercy. Not everyone supported it. Attacks came from rogue raiders who saw the canyon as soft, an easy target full of supplies. From pack extremists who wanted all Valdir dead regardless of council decisions. But they held, fought when necessary, showed mercy when possible, built something that looked increasingly like permanence. And slowly, grudgingly, the packs began to accept that the canyon wasn't going away. 4 months after her meeting with Celine, Lyra stood on the canyon wall watching the sunset. They'd lost good people building this place. 17 in the battle, 3 more in raids, 1 to disease, despite Vera's best efforts. 21 graves carved into the frozen ground. But they'd done it. Created something that shouldn't exist. A place where the rejected could become powerful, where the abandoned could find family, where mercy mattered more than strength. Ira joined her, quiet for a moment, just standing together watching the light fade. Celine sent another letter, Ira said finally. The council's voting next week on permanent recognition. Full neutral status, not just provisional. Will it pass? She thinks so. Not unanimously. Marcus will fight it until he dies. But enough votes to matter. Lyra nodded. She'd done everything she could, proven everything she'd promised. Now it was up to politics and forces beyond her control. Whatever happens, Ira said softly, we built something beautiful here. Something worth fighting for. Worth dying for. Yeah, Lyra agreed. We did. Below them, the canyon was alive with activity. People laughing, working, living actual lives instead of just surviving. Children playing in the snow. Actual children, born here or brought here, growing up in a place that told them being cast out didn't mean being worthless. Somewhere out there, Kael was probably still seething, probably still plotting revenge. Marcus probably still pushed for extermination in every council meeting. The old woman who'd told her about Valdir was still missing, her warnings and prophecies unfinished. But here, now, in this canyon carved from desperation and built with hope and blood and 21 graves, Lyra had created something the Pax couldn't destroy with armies or politics. Not a kingdom, not an empire, just a home. For people who'd never had one before. And that, she thought, was worth every scar. The letter arrived 3 days before the council vote. Lyra was in the training grounds, working with a group of newcomers on basic defensive positions, when Finn appeared at the canyon entrance. His face was pale, his damaged hands clutching a sealed envelope like it might explode. It's from Kael, he said without preamble. Came with a messenger who looked ready to piss himself. Lyra took the letter, broke the seal. The handwriting was sharp, angry, each word carved into the paper with unnecessary force. You think you've won. You think recognition makes you safe. It doesn't. The council votes in 3 days, and I'll be there to ensure they see you for what you really are. A disease that needs to be cut out before it spreads. I'm bringing evidence. Witnesses. Proof that your canyon is exactly the threat Marcus warned about. Enjoy your last days of pretending to be legitimate. Lyra read it twice, then handed it to Finn without comment. He's bluffing, Finn said, but his voice lacked conviction. We haven't raided, haven't attacked. We've followed every rule they set. Rules don't matter if he can make us look dangerous enough, Era said, reading over Finn's shoulder. What kind of evidence could he possibly have? The answer came the next morning. A group of refugees arrived at the canyon. 12 wolves, half-starved, badly beaten. They collapsed at the entrance, begging for sanctuary. Vera rushed to treat them while Lyra tried to piece together their story. We're from the borderlands, one of them gasped. A woman with a broken arm and burn marks across her face. Pack warriors came through yesterday, said they were looking for rogues who'd attacked a supply convoy. We told them we hadn't seen anyone, hadn't done anything. They didn't care. They burned our camp, another added, younger, his voice shaking. Killed 3 people. Said it was a message about what happens to rogues who forget their place. Lyra felt ice forming in her stomach. Which pack? Thorn Pack, led by someone named Garrett. The woman's eyes were haunted. They said Alpha Kael sends his regards. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. Kael was manufacturing evidence, creating attacks to blame on rogues, making it look like the canyon was inspiring violence instead of preventing it. He's trying to force the council's hand, Lyra said quietly. Make them reject recognition by proving rogues are too dangerous to tolerate. We need to go to Celine, Era said immediately. Tell her what's happening. With what proof? The word of rogues against a pack alpha? Lyra shook her head.
She won't be able to help us without evidence. Then we get evidence. Finn's expression was grim. We find out where Kyle warriors are operating and we catch them in the act. It was risky, potentially suicidal. Leaving the canyon meant losing their defensive advantage, and if Kyle's people saw them coming, it would look like the rogues were the aggressors. But doing nothing meant letting Kyle destroy everything they'd built with lies. We go tonight, Lyra decided. Small group, fast and quiet. We find proof, and we get back before anyone knows we left. They took 6 people, Lyra, Finn, Era, Cade, and 2 others who could move silently. They left at midnight, using the darkness and their knowledge of the terrain to slip past the edges of Pack territory. The borderlands were worse than Lyra had imagined. They found 3 burned camps, bodies left in the snow as warnings. At each site, the evidence was clear. Pack warriors had done this, not rogues fighting amongst themselves. The kills were too clean, too organized, professional. At the 4th camp, they found survivors hiding in the ruins. "They're coming back," a terrified girl whispered. She couldn't have been older than Mari. They said they'd return tonight to make sure no one escaped, to send a message. "Then we'll be waiting," Lyra said. They set the trap carefully. Hid in the shadows, weapons ready, while the survivors played their part, huddled by a small fire, looking vulnerable and broken. Bait. The Pack warriors arrived 2 hours after sunset, 5 of them, including Garrett. They moved with casual confidence, already celebrating the easy kills they expected. "Remember," Garrett was saying, loud enough for Lyra to hear from her hiding spot, "make it look like rogue violence. Claws, not blades. We need the council to see savagery." That was all the confirmation they needed. Lyra stepped from the shadows. "Funny, we were thinking the same thing about your evidence." Garrett spun, his hand going to his weapon. "What?" The rest of Lyra's group emerged from hiding, surrounding the Pack warriors, outnumbered but not outmatched. "You're manufacturing attacks," Lyra said calmly, "burning camps, killing innocents, blaming rogues to sabotage the council vote." "That's insane," Garrett blustered. "We're here investigating rogue violence, same as—" "We heard you," Era interrupted. "All of it. The part about making it look savage, about what the council needs to see." Garrett's expression shifted from surprise to calculation to something uglier. "Doesn't matter what you heard. Who's going to believe rogues over Pack warriors?" "These will," Lyra said, gesturing to the survivors, "and anyone else who examines the bodies you left behind. Pack kills have a pattern. You can try to hide it, but trained eyes will see. Then we make sure there are no survivors to tell tales," Garrett said, drawing his blade. "No witnesses means no problem." The fight was brief and brutal. Garrett's warriors were good, but they hadn't expected real resistance. Lyra took Garrett down herself, her claws extending just enough to pin him without killing. Around her, the others subdued the remaining warriors with minimal bloodshed. "You're making a mistake," Garrett snarled from the ground. Kyle will answer for this," Lyra said, "in front of the council, with witnesses." They bound the warriors and started the long march back toward neutral ground. By dawn, they'd reached the clearing where Lyra had met with Celine. She'd sent word ahead, and the Alpha was already there, flanked by council guards. Celine's expression darkened as she took in the bound warriors, the survivors, the evidence written in blood and ash across the borderlands. "Explain," she said. Lyra did. Laid out everything. The burned camps, Garrett's confession, Kyle's plan to sabotage the vote. She kept her voice level, factual, letting the evidence speak. When she finished, Celine turned to Garrett. "Is this true?" Garrett stayed silent, his jaw clenched. "We have witnesses," Lyra said quietly. "Survivors who saw Pack warriors attacking, who heard them talking about sending messages and creating evidence. Rogue witnesses," Garrett finally spoke. "Outcasts who'd say anything to save themselves." "Then examine the camps yourself," Lyra challenged. "Look at the bodies, the wounds. Tell me those were made by rogues fighting each other and not trained warriors covering their tracks." Celine studied them both for a long moment. Then she nodded to her guards. "Take them, all of them. They'll be held until the council can investigate these claims properly." "You can't," Garrett started. "I can and I am," Celine cut him off. "If what she says is true, you've violated every principle of Pack honor. If it's false, the investigation will prove it." She looked at Lyra. "You understand you're gambling everything on this? If the evidence doesn't support your claims, the council will view this as an attack on Pack authority." "I understand," Lyra said. But the truth is the truth, whether it's convenient or not.
The council convened 2 days later in a massive hall carved from stone, ancient and imposing. Representatives from 12 packs filled the space, their voices echoing off the walls as they debated the future of rogue pack relations. Lyra stood in the center, alone, while the council sat in judgment above her. It reminded her uncomfortably of the rejection ceremony. Being on display, being evaluated, being found wanting. Except this time, she wasn't the frightened Omega girl begging for acceptance. This time, she was something else entirely. Kale sat among the council members, his face carefully blank, but his eyes burned with hatred every time they landed on Lyra. The evidence had been examined. The survivors had testified. Even some of Garrett's own warriors, faced with execution for dishonorable conduct, had confirmed the plot. Now came the reckoning. Alpha Selene stood to speak first. The investigation confirms that warriors under Alpha Kale's command deliberately attacked rogue settlements to create false evidence of violence. 3 camps destroyed, 17 innocents killed, all to sabotage recognition of neutral territory. Murmurs rippled through the assembled Alphas. Kael's expression didn't change.
This is about more than politics, Selene continued. This is about honor, about whether we, as packs, can be trusted to follow our own laws. Kael orchestrated these attacks, knowing they violated every principle we claim to uphold. The rogues are still a threat, Marcus spoke up, his voice hard. Perhaps the methods were questionable, but the concern is valid. We're being asked to legitimize settlements that undermine pack authority. We're being asked to acknowledge that exiles have a right to survive, Selene countered. That casting wolves out doesn't give us license to hunt them for sport. They're not being hunted for sport. They're being eliminated as security threats. By burning camps full of children? By manufacturing evidence to justify slaughter? Selene's voice rose. If that's pack justice, then we've become exactly what the old stories warned against. Tyrants who kill anyone who questions our authority. The debate raged for hours. Alphas arguing about sovereignty, safety, tradition, change. About whether rogues deserved rights or just tolerance. About whether Lyra's canyon represented hope or threat. Finally, the head of the council, an ancient alpha named Corvus, who rarely spoke, raised his hand for silence. Enough. His voice carried despite its softness. We're circling the same arguments. Let's address the core question. Do we recognize the canyon as neutral territory, or do we order its dissolution? I call for dissolution, Kael said immediately, standing. The Valdir wolf has proven she can gather and organize rogues. Today it's 100 wolves. Tomorrow it's 1,000. She's building an army whether she admits it or not. I'm building a home, Lyra said quietly. You've built a threat, Kael shot back, and the council would be negligent to ignore it. Corvus looked at Lyra. You've been silent through most of this debate. Do you have anything to say before we vote? Lyra took a breath. This was it. The moment that would determine everything. I was born in a pack, she said, her voice steady. Born to a cursed bloodline, blamed for crimes committed before I existed. I worked harder than anyone, kept my head down, tried to prove I deserved to exist. It didn't matter. When Alpha Kale rejected me, when he cast me out in front of everyone, I was supposed to die quietly in the snow. She met Kael's eyes across the hall. I didn't die. I survived. And I found others who'd survived the same rejection, the same brutality, the same message that they were worthless. Together, we built something. Not an army, not a threat. A place where being cast out doesn't mean being destroyed. You're Valdir, Marcus said. Ancient bloodline or not, you're an abomination by pack law. I'm a wolf who refused to accept that rejection meant death, Lyra corrected. The Valdir blood makes me different, yes. Stronger, faster, harder to kill. But it doesn't make me evil. It doesn't make me a threat unless you force me to be one. She turned to address the full council. You can vote to dissolve the canyon, send armies to tear down what we've built, scatter my people back into the wilderness to die alone. You have that power. But ask yourselves, what message does that send? That survival is a crime, that building community is rebellion, that any wolf who questions pack authority deserves execution? We maintain order, Corvus said quietly. Without hierarchy, without authority, we'd have chaos. You maintain control, Lyra said. There's a difference. Order can exist without tyranny. Community can exist without submission. She paused. I'm not asking you to abandon pack structure. I'm asking you to acknowledge that it's not the only way to live. That wolves you've cast out deserve a chance to build something else.
Silence fell over the hall. Lyra could feel the weight of their judgment, the centuries of tradition pushing back against her words. "The girl makes a point," Celine said finally. "We've been treating exile as a death sentence, pretending we're not responsible for what happens after we cast wolves out. The canyon forces us to acknowledge that those wolves don't just disappear. They survive. They build. They become something we have to reckon with. Or they become armies that threaten our way of life," Marcus countered. Marcus system. "Only if we force them to," Celine said. "Only if we make survival impossible and leave them no choice but violence." Corvus studied Lyra for a long moment. "If we grant recognition, you understand the conditions? No attacks, no raids, no harboring of murderers or traitors?" "I understand," Lyra said. "And you'll enforce those rules, keep your people in line?" "I'll do my best, but I won't become a tyrant to satisfy pack politics. The canyon is built on choice, on community, on the idea that we're worth more than our worst moments." She met his eyes. "I can promise to try. I can't promise perfection." "An honest answer, at least," Corvus said. He looked around at the other alphas. "We vote. All in favor of recognizing the canyon as neutral territory bound by the terms already established." Hands rose, Celine's immediately, then others, slowly, reluctantly, but enough. Enough. "Motion passes," Corvus said. "The canyon is recognized as neutral territory. Rogues residing there will be considered outside pact jurisdiction, provided they adhere to the established terms." Lyra felt her knees go weak with relief. They'd done it. Actually done it. "However," Corvus continued, his voice hardening, "Alpha Kael will answer for his warriors' actions. Orchestrating attacks on innocents to manufacture evidence is dishonorable conduct. This council strips him of his position pending full investigation." Kael's face went white. "You can't." "We can and we are," Corvus said. "You brought dishonor to your pack and to this council. Be grateful we're investigating rather than executing." Guards moved to escort Kael from the hall. As he passed Lyra, he leaned close enough to whisper, "This isn't over. I'll destroy you if it's the last thing I do." "Get in line," Lyra whispered back. The journey back to the canyon took 2 days. By the time Lyra arrived, word had already spread. Her people were waiting at the entrance, anxious and hopeful and terrified all at once. "Well?" Finn demanded. Lyra smiled. "We're legitimate. Officially recognized. The canyon is ours." The cheering was deafening. People crying, laughing, embracing. The tension that had hung over everything for months finally breaking. Era threw her arms around Lyra. "We did it. We actually did it." "Yeah," Lyra said, returning the embrace. "We did." That night, they held a feast. Nothing fancy, mostly dried meat and root vegetables and the meager stores they'd been rationing. But it felt like a celebration anyway, like marking something important. Lyra stood on the canyon wall watching her people below. 137 wolves now, from a dozen different packs. All of them rejects, outcasts, the unwanted, and discarded. All of them building something new. Finn joined her, carrying 2 cups of something that smelled vaguely alcoholic. "Vera made it from fermented berries. Tastes like regret, but gets you drunk." Lyra took a sip, winced. "That's awful." "Yeah." Finn drank anyway. "Can't believe we pulled this off." "Me neither." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the celebration. Someone had started singing, off-key but enthusiastic. Others were dancing, their shadows long in the firelight. "What happens now?" Finn asked. "We have recognition. We have legitimacy. What's next?" Lyra considered the question. "We keep building. We make this place everything we promised it would be. We prove that being cast out doesn't mean being worthless. And when the packs inevitably try to destroy us anyway, then we fight again, but from a position of strength this time, with allies and recognition and the moral high ground." She smiled. "We make them work for it." Finn laughed. "You've changed, you know that? The girl who got rejected at that ceremony, she wouldn't have said that." "That girl died in the snow," Lyra said quietly. "What's left is something else. Something the packs created when they tried to destroy me. Something better?" Lyra thought about that. Was she better? She'd killed people, led others to their deaths, made impossible choices that haunted her nightmares. She'd become harder, colder, more willing to do whatever survival required. But she'd also built something beautiful, given hope to people who'd had none.
created community where there'd been only isolation. Something necessary, she said finally. Whether that's better or worse depends on who you ask. The celebration continued into the night. At some point, Mari convinced Lyra to dance. Awkward, clumsy, both of them laughing at how bad they were at it. Vera told stories about the old days, before the modern packs, when wolves lived differently. Cade started a wrestling match that quickly devolved into a dozen people tumbling in the snow. It was messy and chaotic and imperfect. It was home. 3 months later, on the first warm day of spring, Lyra stood at the canyon entrance welcoming another group of exiles. 23 wolves this time, cast out from the stone pack for various minor infractions. "You're safe here," she told them. The words she'd said hundreds of times now. "No one's going to hurt you. No one's going to judge you for what you were. Here, you get to decide what you become." The relief on their faces never got old. Era appeared with food and blankets, already organizing shelter assignments. Finn was working on expansion plans. They'd need more caves soon, more storage, more infrastructure. Vera was training a whole cohort of healers now, passing on everything she knew. The canyon had grown beyond anything Lyra had imagined. 180 people now, children learning to read and write, elders teaching skills, warriors training not for dominance but for defense, a community. That night, Lyra climbed to her favorite spot on the canyon wall, the highest point where she could see everything. The settlement below, the frontier beyond, the stars overhead. She thought about the girl she'd been, the one who'd scrubbed pots in the Thornpack kitchens, who'd believed that working hard enough would earn acceptance, who'd stood in a ceremonial circle and been rejected in front of everyone. That girl had been desperate to belong, desperate to prove she deserved to exist. This woman didn't need anyone's permission anymore. The Valder blood hummed quietly in her chest, not the explosive heat of battle, but a steady warmth, a reminder of power that was hers by right, not by anyone's approval. "You were right," she said quietly to the night, to the old woman who had disappeared into the frontier. "I became something they can't control." A sound made her turn. Someone was climbing up to join her, probably Finn or Era, checking on her like they always did. But it wasn't either of them. The old woman stood at the edge of the platform, exactly as Lyra remembered her. Pale gray eyes, knowing smile, the aura of something ancient and dangerous. "Hello, child," she said. "I thought it was time we talked again." Lyra's heart raced. "Where have you been?" "Watching, waiting, making sure you survived long enough to become what you needed to become." The old woman moved closer. "You've done well. Better than I hoped. The canyon, the recognition, the community you've built. It's impressive. But the real work is just beginning." The old woman's smile faded. "You've proven the Valder bloodline can survive. Now you need to prove it can thrive. There are others, Lyra, scattered across the continent, hiding, afraid. They need to know it's safe to emerge. They need a leader." "I'm barely leading this canyon," Lyra said. "I'm not ready to—" "You're never ready. That's not how leadership works." The old woman placed a weathered hand on Lyra's shoulder. "You were cast out, rejected, told you were worthless, and you turned that pain into purpose. That's what makes you dangerous. Not the Valder blood, but the fact that you refused to accept the story they wrote for you." Lyra looked at the canyon below, at the people who'd trusted her with their lives. "What if I fail? What if I can't protect them all?" "Then you fail. But you fail trying, which is more than most people ever do." The old woman's grip tightened. "The packs fear you because you represent change, because you prove that their system isn't the only way. That's why they'll keep trying to destroy you. That's why this fight never really ends." "Comforting. I'm not here to comfort you, I'm here to tell you the truth." The old woman released her shoulder, stepped back. "You're Valdir, the first of a new generation. What you do now will echo for centuries. The canyon is just the beginning. Will you help?" "I already am. Why do you think I found you in the first place?" The old woman smiled. "But this is your story to write, not mine. I'm just here to make sure you know what's possible." She turned to leave, paused at the edge of the platform. "One more thing, Kyle isn't done. The council stripped his title, but that just made him more dangerous. He has nothing left to lose now." "Let him come," Lyra said. Such confidence. "Good." The old woman's eyes glinted. "You'll need it." Then she was gone, disappearing into the darkness like smoke. Lyra stood alone on the canyon wall, processing the conversation. More Valdir out there, hiding. Kyle still a threat.
the real work just beginning. She should have felt overwhelmed, should have felt the weight of impossible expectations. Instead, she felt something else. Determination, purpose. The certainty that whatever came next, she'd face it the same way she'd faced everything since the rejection, by refusing to give up. Below, her people were settling in for the night. Fires being banked, children being tucked into beds, guards taking positions for the night watch, all of them depending on her, all of them trusting that the canyon would keep them safe. Lyra wouldn't let them down. She'd been rejected, cast out, left to die. The packs had thrown her away like garbage, certain she'd disappear into the snow and never be heard from again. They'd been wrong. She'd survived. Built something from nothing, turned pain into power and rejection into revolution. And she wasn't done yet. The night wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and smoke and possibility. Somewhere out there, other Valder were hiding, waiting, hoping someone would show them it was safe to emerge. Somewhere out there, Kael was plotting revenge, gathering allies, preparing for another confrontation. Somewhere out there, the future was waiting to be written. Lyra smiled. Let it come. She'd be ready. She was the Omega they'd rejected, the wolf they'd tried to destroy, the Valdir they'd thought was extinct. She was the storm they should have killed when they had the chance. And now it was too late. The canyon was hers. Her people were safe. And anyone who tried to take that away would learn the same lesson Kael had learned on that battlefield. Mercy was a choice, not a weakness. And Lyra Ashen didn't have to choose it twice. She stood on the canyon wall as stars filled the sky, feeling the Valdir blood humming in her veins, and smiled at the future only she could see. The outcasts had found their home. The rejected had found their power. The story the packs had tried to end was just beginning. And Lyra? Lyra was finally, completely, devastatingly free.